again, I suppose if you haven't dialed in, you can't hear me. But the info is there on the screen, so you should be able to dial in and participate that way. Thank you all for joining us for this this workshop for the AB 901 rulemaking process. This is our hopefully last informal workshop in the process. We've had some previous workshops on the AB 901 rulemaking, and we've received a lot of good feedback from people. So appreciate all the participation from folks who are in the room and folks who are participating remotely. We'll have a copy of this workshop in Southern California in Diamond Bar tomorrow. So those of you who would like to participate remotely for the Diamond Bar workshop, please do. And those who are participating remotely today but might be interested in participating in person tomorrow, we'll be at the HQMB building in Diamond Bar tomorrow. So we're going to walk through today. The agenda is going to be basically walking through the summary intent of the statute that these regs are intended to clarify, discuss a little bit of the affected parties, and then walk through the main categories of the regulations, including thresholds and reporting requirements, who are end users, who need to report, who don't need to report, under what conditions folks need to report, what detail people need to report, reasonable methods for estimating various portions of the reporting requirements, and then enforcement and confidentiality. Hopefully everybody's had an opportunity to see the newest draft regulations that were posted on a public notice and sent out via the listserv. So you have some sense of what was changed from the previous version of the regulations. But we'll go through some of them briefly for folks in case they haven't been in the previous workshop.
And as a quick note, we're hoping to get feedback during each of these categories. So if you have questions or comments regarding one of these sections, please hold those comments until that section, and anything else that's not covered in this agenda, we can bring up at the end in the general questions section.
Thank you, Walter. Question?
Just what's the release date you're speaking of, the most recent version?
Sure. So the question was what the release date is of the most recent version, and that was November 4th.
Okay.
Hopefully everybody has the most recent version. It should be at the top of your page. November 4th, 2016 is the most recent version. Okay, so I'm going to go through very briefly a little bit of background. I know a lot of people have been in previous workshops and I've heard this a number of times, but I don't want to belabor the point. But for some folks who maybe are coming into this new, who have been made aware of the requirements recently and maybe haven't been participating in previous workshops, I want to just cover some basic broad overviews of what 901 is and what the intention is. So 901 was signed in 2015, and it does really two major things. One is to update and streamline the disclosure reporting processes, the procedures. We like to take advantage of the current technologies. We have online digital reporting or disclosure reporting, and to bypass a little bit of the consolidation that has been happening in the past. So in the past, what's happened is facilities report to counties report to CalRecycle, and under 901, the counties have been removed from that reporting structure, and facilities report directly to CalRecycle for the side of things. The second part of it is the inclusion of recycling and composting reporting. Now, this is new for the industry. So composting and recycling facilities will need to be reporting in a similar fashion as disposal facilities, except that rather than reporting source information, i.e. jurisdiction of origin and source sector, they will instead be reporting material types and tonnages of material being sent out of their facility to either the processing facility or to an end user. And we'll discuss some of the details about the major benefits to all of this is that we're going to be removing manual data input. As we all know, people inputting data manually have a lot of opportunity for problems and errors in data input. So having fewer opportunities for these errors to accumulate results in higher quality data overall. And the inclusion of recycling and composting data will advance CalRecycle's overall mandates for 50 and 75% diversion mandates and mandatory commercial recycling requirements and so on. So as I said, this is the last of the informal workshop. For those of you who aren't terribly familiar with the rulemaking process, we like to start with these informal workshops to get input from the regulated community, both in this room and those who are participating remotely, to get some scope for the regulations, to help us understand how the regulations are going to impact the regulated community, and help us to more efficiently adjust the regulations to accommodate the specifics of the regulated community. Once we've completed the informal process, which I say this really represents the end of the informal process, we move into the formal rulemaking process, which is governed by the Office of Administrative Law, or OAL. And there's a very clear structured process that OAL oversees that accommodates formal feedback and agency responses to those questions, concerns, etc. That process, depends a little bit on what kinds of comments we get from the regulated community, but it generally takes roughly a year or so, and so we're hoping to start that process early in the spring, late winter, early spring of 2017, depending on the nature and extent of comments that we receive from this workshop. And given that start date, we're hoping to complete for early 2018-ish. Again, the timeline depends a little bit on how we receive comments from people during that process and how long it takes to respond to them, the nature of those comments. But as I say, roughly a year. So we're anticipating roughly 2018, early 2018 to complete the formal rulemaking process. Of course, we're going to need to develop a online reporting system, database management system to accommodate the new data inflow from the regulated community, and that's just starting now. So as we begin developing that system, that process, depending on the specifics of the regulations and how much change happens between now and as we're developing the database system, we may be finishing up sort of in the middle of 2018 or late 2018, depending on how the database system sort of parallels the rulemaking process. So we'll try to make that happen as quickly as possible. Obviously, we're going to be working towards making the online reporting system as user-friendly and easy to use as possible. But we're right in the very beginning stages of that, and a lot of it is dependent on the details of the actual regulations that are approved through this process. So there's going to be some possibility for adjustment as we move forward. If we move forward, the major statutory changes, as sort of alluded to earlier, the facilities will report directly to CalRecycle rather than the county, and we're expanding beyond just disposal reporting, as has been the case for a number of years for jurisdictions 50% diversion mandate, and expanding it into recycling and composting reporting for a number of purposes, including CalRecycle 75% diversion mandate statewide, but also all of our other statutory requirements requirements, including our mandatory commercial recycling requirements and organic, as we move into 1383 and other mandates. We're also going to be moving away from manual paper reporting and into online only reporting. So that will result in higher quality data, and maybe more importantly, including the opportunity for CalRecycle enforcement and civil penalties to make sure that all entities are operating under the same playing field, that everybody is required to report and participate in the same system, and that makes sure that we get really high quality data and that everybody is held to the same standard. So with that being said, with a little bit of background, I'm going to pass this over to my colleague, Alonka, and she will walk you guys all through all of the different aspects of the new version of the regulation. As she mentioned earlier, she'll be pausing after each of the individual sections to provide some opportunity for people to provide their questions or comments after the session. So, Alonka, please take it away.
Yeah.
Just a quick reminder for folks online, if you could mute your phones, it would be good. We're getting some bumps and noises here that are probably from those folks, so please mute your devices.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Ilonka Slatar, and I've been working a lot on the 9-1 regulations and chatting with a bunch of you under various circumstances. So thank you for coming. Are there any questions on kind of the introduction or how this workshop is going to run today? No? All right. We're going to get started here. These are our affected parties, so the people that we expect to have to report in one way or another. And this includes auto shredders, dismantlements from junkyards, construction demolition, debris processors, composting, industrial digestion facilities, wastewater treatment plants, landfills, DMSW excavation, and so on. Things of note here include that the types of materials that we are going to track include plastic, glass, paper, construction demolition debris, white goods, organic, metals, and any person who is involved in the processing of any of those materials is going to be subject to the reporting requirements. Depending on the threshold, so how much they're doing and where they're sending it, will determine the type of information that they will have to submit. So everyone on this list has to report something if they're above the threshold, and what the specific information is then depends on what they're doing with the material, the activities that they're involved in. Do we have any comments on this section? We have a couple of things.
Hi, Graham Noyes. Wanted to ask if this is a good time to ask it on the waste to fuels facility, sort of what category would they fit under, so to speak, for what role do they have in the system for reporting purposes?
Yeah, sure. The question, just in case those online didn't hear, is where the waste to fuel folks would land on this structure. And we are functioning under basically the same outline that we've been running for a long time, which is anything that's transformation, gasification, pyrolysis is going to fit under disposal at this time. So they're under the same category for reporting requirements as disposal. Is that a follow-up question?
Yeah, if I can follow up on that. So to the extent that you're in one of those categories, you're potentially a disposal facility, but potentially if you're outside of those categories, would you be somewhere else in the program, or would you be outside the program?
That's a pretty good question. We're hoping that the definition of transformation facility and gasification is pretty inclusive, I think, of the things that we've seen up to date. Did Robert, did you have something to add?
Yeah, Graham, I'd be inclined to ask whether you have any particular examples of facilities that are operating that don't meet the definitions of transformation as they exist now, that you think might either fall under the recycling or composting requirements definition, or more importantly, the ones that you think might fall out of both the disposal definition as well as the recycling composting. Our intention is that facilities that are handling solid waste or recycling or composting materials, all of those facilities sort of fall under one of the categories. If we're in a situation at this point where we define things in such a way where there is a small niche category where somehow we've missed something and something falls out, that would be something that we would be interested in knowing, because we want to broaden the definitions a bit to include those things into one or another category.
Okay, good. Well, I do think there's sort of a next generation that may be outside of disposal, but that's a really specific topic that's probably not worth taking up everybody's time on here, so I'll follow up separately on that.
Okay, great, thank you. Veronica.
California Refuse Recycling Council, thank you for this list, and just wondering if this is going to be posted anywhere, because we had asked for a list of the requirements, so thank you, but just hoping it will get posted somewhere so it's not strictly people have to come to this presentation to see this list.
We can make that available. Sure.
Maybe on your 901 website.
Yeah, so the presentation here is posted on the website as a public notices, et cetera, so that will be available for folks to see. This list is not, entirely inclusive. The way that the regulations are written, they're based on your operational details, and so there are potentially some that are on the list who might not have to report depending on how they're operating, and there's some that maybe fall outside of the specifics of this list that would have to report anyway because of the way that they operate, and we just haven't incorporated. But yes, I understand that there's a need to provide a list of who's included and who's not, and hopefully this at least helps to clarify some of that. And the fact that that's on our public notice site as the presentation for this workshop hopefully is enough to help people understand who should and who should not be reporting under this regulation.
Yeah, so your fact sheet site or whatever, I mean, if you have this list available, that would make it easier, because again, I'm at the risk of repeating myself. There are many people who are in this room who continue to be in this room, but a lot of the folks, wastewater treatment, auto shredders, some of these junkyard folks, haven't necessarily been as involved up until this point. So just making it as publicly available as possible, I think, will bring people into the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
We do have an online question if we have any more. I think we have it here in the room.
Oh, thank you. Now I'm looking at the list of my name's Lane Burley, I work for Senegal. Oh, great. And I look up there at the reporters, and I look at here reporting requirements for haulers. So, and maybe I just don't see it up there. You have brokers, transporters, and exporters, but I don't see haulers up there. Are they required to report also? Transporter is a hauler?
Thank you for your question. Yes. This is intended to show people if you are handling, transporting, processing any of these materials, it doesn't matter what you want to call yourself, you're going to be required to do something for us. And we'll talk more about the requirements for haulers when we get to that section. But generally, the hauler is not required to report except for certain circumstances. Okay, and we had an online question which asked if household hazardous waste facilities were required to report. And you'll notice here that we don't have household hazardous waste as a reportable material. That's not to say that if a facility is taking household hazardous waste along with other things, like if they're sending out a really large stream of paint cans, for example, that are metal, that they're scrapping, that's a reportable flow. Okay, so again, we're trying to think about the activity
more than the facility name per se. If you're a household hazardous waste site and you take household hazardous waste, you don't have to report to us for 901 on the household hazardous waste aspect of the facility. If there are other things that you're collecting and you're above the threshold, then you have to report on those other flows. That makes sense? Larry is looking very confused or shaking his head.
Well, you know a little bit about household facilities. They don't collect empty paint cans. They process paint and they end up with an empty paint can, they end up with cardboard, they end up with garbage.
Yeah.
Just as any other business generator does.
And at that point, you are point of collection of waste material that is then going to be recycled. So again, we're trying to divorce the facility type from the activity. If the activity is you have over 100 tons of empty paint cans that you sent for recycling, then you're going to report on the paint cans.
Report as what type of entity? Because they're a business, they're generating.
As a recycler, if you're collecting or sending it to be recycled, then that flow is a recycling flow, and you would report as a recycler.
But they're not recycling it, they're just collecting. They're generating an empty paint can, they're generating a cardboard and setting it on, just like a business that opens a box as a cardboard box. They're not having to report as a business.
Right, so Larry, you're sort of making the argument that an HSW facility is serving as a generator of material, just like any commercial entity might. They're generating some hazardous waste in the process of their operations, and they're also generating some non-hazardous waste that they're sending for recycling or perhaps to disposal. You know, I think when we originally conceived all of this, we sort of thought that HSW facilities that have byproducts like paint cans or cardboard boxes or aerosol cans or what have you, glass containers, that the material came into their facility and then this byproduct, I think we conceived of that as being a reportable flow as a recycler. Perhaps, so it makes more sense to look at those facilities as generators, the same as an auto body shop or a paint facility or whatever, who is generating hazardous and non-hazardous materials as byproducts of their business operations. So let's talk with Kate and Elliot about how we fit into that. But perhaps you're right that those operations fit more into the generator status than they do for recycler status.
If you follow that logic, then every business would have to report the fact that they generate a cardboard box.
We'll have to discuss that matter further. So if you want to chat with us about it more and provide some guidelines, that'd be helpful. Any other comments in the room? We did have another question online as to whether whether CalRecycle would rely on counties to reach out to these reporting entities to inform them, or if we were going to be doing that ourselves. And to answer that, we've used the resources that we have. So we have the facility toolkit that has a lot of contact information. We have gotten a lot of bounces when we try to email out large emails. That's not via a listserv. So we're having a hard time reaching people. So I would say we would love some help in reaching out to those people. If counties or jurisdictions would be willing to help us distribute this information, because it has become pretty complicated to try to reach out to those people because we do have such a large list and they're not signed up on a listserv. It's hard for us to get the message across. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll add that, ultimately when it comes down to the responsibility for who needs to be reaching out and identifying facilities, to bring them into the reporting obligation, that makes squarely with CalRecycle under the statute. But that being said, our local jurisdictions who are on the ground who have relationships with these facilities ones who know who the players are. They know who's coming into their gate, they know who's calling in their jurisdictions, they know who's operating facilities, who's doing recycling, composting in their jurisdictions. Much better, I think, than probably we do. And so, we would be foolish, I think, to not ask for assistance from local jurisdictions for identifying who should potentially be included in the reporting obligations under 901. So we will certainly be reaching out to our local jurisdiction counterparts to identify who is operating in their jurisdictions and who should and shouldn't be reporting, and whether there are misreporting being done by certain entities. So while the ultimate responsibility falls on us as CalRecycle, we'll certainly be reaching out to local jurisdictions to make sure that we're not missing anybody and that we're taking advantage of all of the resources that we have available to us.
No questions from me?
Hi, Nick Lopez, California Employees. I have a few questions. I'm getting a little bit lost in the draft, right? Just trying to follow the logic from one section to another, and so there are a couple things I'd like just clarification on. First of all, in the definition of hauler, you say that a hauler is anybody who hauls to a reporting entity, end user, or outside the state. And then you go to definition of reporting entity. There's a list of folks who are reporting entities. So they're mostly other solid waste businesses. And then you have definition of end user, which is the other option, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so an end user means the person who uses a product made from recycled material after a level of processing that results in that material basically being finished product. What happens to somebody who's hauling to a facility that's not a reporting entity, but isn't sufficiently processing the material to the point that it's the end user definition? It seems like there's a way to get out of the system if you're taking it to say a processor, for traditional recyclables, a processor that isn't producing a finished product, or in the case of organics, I could see direct land application and falling through the cracks here, especially since direct land application is explicitly not included under the end users. Well, it's actually a little bit conflicting because the second part of the end user definition is becomes a homogeneous mixture of material, such as aggregate or crushed miscellaneous base, mulch, or compost, or a material suitable for direct land application. What happens if it's not a material suitable for direct land application because it didn't undergo pathogen reduction and contamination reduction? And then on the next line, you say that end user does not mean a person solely engaged in baling, washing, or size reduction. And how do you handle a chip and grind? It just seems like there's a gap in that definition.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We should definitely look at that again.
Well, and I'll also say that end users, for the purpose of a direct line application, we're to some extent relying on other regulatory requirements for direct land application, which to some extent rely on our regulations as well as PDFA and the Department of Public Health about what is allowed to be directly applied to the land. And so if it meets the requirements to be applied to the land, then it falls under one category. And I understand there might be some confusion about the fact that some facilities that are just size reducing and grading, et cetera, are doing so for the purposes of direct land application. So maybe there is a miscommunication there as far as some cross purposes. We're size reducing and grading for the purposes of land application. So it sounds to some extent like it qualifies as an end user and at the same time not as an end user. Right. So we'll take a look at the language to make sure that we tighten that up. What we want to make sure is that as a facility that is just shipping plastic and then grading that in size reducing the plastic itself, but that's not considered an end user. But when you're chipping and grinding organic material for the purposes of land application, that does qualify as an end user.
But that shouldn't, because it's not an end user. I guess it's the easier way to approach this, rather than trying to make everybody an end user, would be to add more language to the hauler section. Right now you have end user reporting entity or outside state. There needs to be some other catch-all that catches the rest of the material that doesn't go to one of those three.
So you're suggesting that there's a category for direct land application that is not considered an end user. What category would you consider direct land application to fall under?
Well, take the example of illegal land application. Land application we do not deem to be legal.
Well, in that case, if it's an illegal dump site, then
Yeah.
it's not going to be reporting, because that's illegal, right? So it's outside of the legal
That's
structure.
part of the point of 91, was to track down the material so we can find the illegal operation. And if by definition, the ones who are not following the law don't have to follow this law either. I mean, we basically need to we have a mass balance of all the material moving through the state. And if you're not setting it to a legal end use, as defined here, you are out of the system.
Well, let me jump in a little bit. Whether the regs are written this way or not, but I think what we're intending is if you're chip and grind and you send to land application, you would report on that you sent that to a certain amount to the end use category of land application. At that point, we can look and see if we want more detail. We can look at facility records to see where that's going and if the requirements have been met at those facilities or at those locations where it went.
So we can go into more detail offline, but I first of all don't think it accomplishes that as written. But even if it did, the hauler who would take it to that chip and grind facility would still not be a hauler under your definition.
Well, I think that in the definition of hauler, if a hauler takes materials from a generator to a facility, whether it's a recycling, composting, or disposal facility, is a hauler, and they have to provide certain information to those facilities.
Well, we can get into a little more detail offline. Don't
Yeah,
bore everybody else, but I'm totally sure you guys are accomplishing that.
No, we want to make these as, as tight and inclusive as possible, so we want to crack down on those little, if there's an inkling of, something not being tight, then we definitely want to tighten that up. But generally, if there's a hauler taking to a chip and grind is a reporting entity, after organic recycler, and they would report as well. So that flow should be covered really well.
You have a chip and grinder listed as a reporting entity.
It's under the definition of recycling. So a recycling entity is somebody who recycles, and recycling includes things like organic recycling, which is explicitly stated as chip and grinding.
Okay, well, we should go through that.
Yeah.
I have some other kind of detailed questions I might save for later, but one more definitional question. You have food waste self-hauler defined as somebody who hauls more than 1 cubic yard per week.
Mm-hmm.
And then under the reporting requirements, you require food waste self-haulers that haul at least 12 cubic yards per reporting period to report.
Right.
So I understand where you got that. 12, 1 per week times 12 weeks, 12. You're sort of creating two different classes of food waste self-haulers. That might just be complicated for the generators. I think it's just for simplicity's sake. Instead of having food waste self-haulers and then a subset of food waste self-haulers for reporting that are mostly going to be the same people but aren't always, it might just make sense to stick with one of them.
Under which circumstance do you see them being different people?
If you haul 5 cubic yards in 1 week because you're a large venue and you have a big event, you are a food waste self-hauler.
Mm-hmm.
But
So,
if you don't have another event within
yeah.
that 12, if you don't have 7 more cubic yards generated within that reporting period, you are not falling into that second category.
Right, and our intent was to just get the 12-yard size, right? We don't want the single event to have to report, but the language in 1103 says that we have to specifically say 1 cubic yard per week. So if you can think of like a better way for us to phrase that, that's not confusing, while still like fulfilling our statutory requirements, and we would be definitely interested in looking at it.
I'll let our friends, CRC, comment on how they would like to see 1103 implemented.
And I'll say that, we've got a situation where you might be defined as a food waste hauler at 1 cubic yard per week, but you don't have a reporting obligation until you reach the 12 cubic yard per quarter threshold. And that was a little bit our way of trying to adhere to the statutory requirements of 3 while still making it conducive to facilities that have, relatively small, single-time food waste hauling opportunities, like you say, 5 cubic yards in 1 week, but that's the only week that you have in the entire quarter, and that wasn't essentially the intention of the statute. So we're defining them in one way, but having a reporting obligation that's based on another obligation. So I understand that it's somewhat confusing, but I think it's the most clear way that we could do it, given the constraints that we have.
You might want to just put that in a big Q. That actually, I think, is what you're doing. Totally clear.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Dan Noble, Association of Compost Producers. Sort of piggyback on Nick's questions there. I didn't notice that in your slide deck that you have that you're going to specifically address definitions. Is that true? Is now the time to deal with definitions? This is
For compost, we have a whole section about the organic under the reporting requirements section. So
yeah, but I have a specific issue about the definition of organic.
We are going to talk about that specifically later.
Okay. And compostable materials, which I don't see in here.
Sure. Yeah. We'll talk about that in that section.
Okay.
Thank you. We have a few online questions. Did you want to read them out? Sure. Thank you. Is it working? Yes. Okay. Robert stated in August that a cost-benefit analysis would be performed to determine economic impacts on entities has been done.
Yeah, so the Office of Administrative Law requires an economic analysis be performed for all rulemaking processes that meet certain requirements. And we are currently working with the Department of Finance to determine the extent of which that economic analysis is performed. We're working on some of the preliminary pieces of that. As we move forward through the rulemaking process, we'll get more information about what level of detail needs to be for that. The economic analysis that's performed for a rulemaking process will be submitted through the Department of Finance and ultimately to the Office of Administrative Law, and it will be reviewable by the public once it's submitted to the Office of Administrative Law. But no, it's not been completed as of yet.
And I wouldn't describe it as a cost-benefit analysis. It is just economic impact of the regulation. So we are in the process of that, and toward the end of this, we will mention that we're going to ask you for some help in getting some economic impact data related to reporting.
The next question is, my agency operates a transfer station, recycling center, green waste, and an HHW facility that are all located at the same lot. In determining if we meet the 100 tons per reporting period minimum, should we consider each operation individually or together? It's a great question. So in 901, there is a description of separating recycling and composting flows from disposal flows. So if they have a transfer station, that's, no, we said transfer station is under, okay, so basically anything that's not a landfill, can be reported in a single report, to the department. So if you have a landfill co-located with 15 other facilities that are doing recycling and composting operations, all of those other operations are going to be in the same report, and then your disposal, so your landfill or transformation, is going to be on a separate report. Each of those would have to be over the 100 times. Like, now I have to think about it.
Right, so, yeah, exactly. If you have multiple facilities, multiple recycling composting facilities, you have the opportunity to report those, as a single operation, under the statute. So you can report them all together, which means that all of the recycling and composting operations, the total flows that you have out of those facilities, would be considered for your total, for the reporting minimum. You also have a disposal facility co-located with those recycling or composting facilities that have to be considered separately. Because recycling and composting facilities, according to statute, can be consolidated, but recycling and disposal facilities cannot. So take them as you like. The recycling and composting facilities can be consolidated into one, in which case you have all of the totals adding up for those facilities as a whole. If you would like to report them all individually as different operations, that is also an option that you have. And if you have each individual facility operating under those minimum thresholds, then if you would like to register each of them individually, then you can do that and evaluate them separately.
The next question, yeah, is I do not, I'm sorry. While I appreciate that CalRecycle wants help on this issue, I believe identifying affected parties, as there are potential fines associated with late or incorrect reporting, I feel it is far more appropriate that CalRecycle be ultimately responsible for such outreach.
Yeah, so, as I said earlier, CalRecycle is ultimately responsible for ensuring that facilities that are required to report are reporting, and that those reporting facilities are reporting accurately. We are hoping to take advantage of the fact that local jurisdictions understand their local facilities and to hopefully help us with that. But yes, you're right. CalRecycle is ultimately responsible for making sure that facilities are reporting, should be reporting, and they're reporting accurately and on time.
And this might be a technical question. User question. I do not see the PowerPoint posted on CalRecycle's website. And she checked the page with notice and draft regs for today's workshop or the general web page with all of CRS 8901 links. So can you share the link in the right direction?
So that should be on. If it's not on, we'll make sure that it is on later, probably tomorrow. So sorry. Sorry. All right, moving on. Any other questions in the room about this section? Seeing none, moving on. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the reports to the department being electronic. We're going to set up a new database and user interface called the Diversion and Disposal Reporting System, and to replace the current disposal reporting system. Under most circumstances, people who are sending stuff to other processors, other recyclers, and anyone who isn't an end user is going to have to provide the contact information for that processor. So even if you are, shipping bales to China, we'd like to know what processor you're actually shipping to in China. Reports are to be submitted to the department within 60 days of the end of the reporting period by anyone other than a disposal facility
and submitted to, by disposal facilities within 90 days. In the hauler section, we have the requirement for haulers to report to the receiving facility in 30 days. So a hauler is going to have 30 days to report to wherever they're taking it. And the first stop, if it's a MRF or a transfer station, is going to have 60 days, and then the disposal facility, the landfill, is going to have 90 days for the report. And we didn't include here haulers because under most circumstances, haulers are not reporting directly to the department. That's why you don't see haulers in the slide. Because these are the reports to the department, and haulers are mostly required to report to the person that they're getting material to. And here we'll point to that question, recycling and composting operations at a single site and aggregate into one report. Any questions on this? Yes, Veronica. Hi, Veronica, part of CRC. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm not seeing the 60-90 day marcation in the current regulatory language. It does have the date of the reporting period per quarter, but the only date I see is 30 days by hauler. So it's 60 and 90 days. So that's under the section X3. There's like a small table that has the dates. Yeah, so those are 60, 90 for disposal facilities and for everyone else that has to submit reports to the department. So it has those dates, June 30th, September 30th, December 31st. It says disposal facilities and all other reporters are a month prior to that. Is that correct? And so that's the assumption there with that month difference, would be that 90 days. Yeah.
And a quick question, you talk about the reports by category rather than individual end user, which I like, but then you say category and region, and you don't have a definition for region. Are you going to get into that later, I assume?
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we talk about end users. Do you have an online question?
We have a question about reporting. The question is, do you provide a form we would report with?
A form? Is that the question? Yeah. So we're going to have everything be input into a system. We will provide the system into information. We're going to try to make it so that if you're keeping your information on an Excel spreadsheet, you'd be able to import it all at once if it's organized correctly. So you would have to be keying it all in. But yeah, we will provide the data frame for the data input. Any other questions in this section?
Currently under the current URL system, you can email the upload file because there are significant problems with trying to upload it yourself. So I rely on CalRecycle staff. Sorry.
So I rely on CalRecycle staff to work their magic on my upload file and upload it for me because it is very difficult to get that upload file exactly how your system wants it. So is there an option for us to continue to just submit that upload file in Excel format? So are you a facility or are you a county? A county. Okay, so counties don't have to report anything anymore? Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Yeah. So we are also two facilities. So for the facility file, we'll be able to send an upload file to you? The short answer is going to be no. We're going to rely on the facilities to put the information in the correct format. And we're going to provide training videos and other tools to make sure that people know how to keep track of their records and how to keep their data.
And I'll add that we will try to make it as easy as possible. We're just getting in the beginning stages of developing the data system as far as how we're going to maintain our database as well as how we're going to interface with folks that are submitting data through the online system. And exactly how that's going to work as far as the format for either if you're going to just log in and type your data in manually or if you want to try to upload your data via a PDF file or an Excel file or what have you. We're too early to understand that's going to work. We're going to try to make it as easy as possible for everybody so that it's quick and takes advantage of whatever data system you're currently using and the export files that you're currently capable of generating. But we don't know exactly how that's all going to work out just yet. But we'll be in touch with folks as we develop that system so that we make it as easy as possible moving forward.
And I would like to add also that as we're developing the system, we are going to be sending out surveys to try to get a feel for the industry and where they're at with their record capabilities. So if you see, in an email from us, requesting some information like what kind of categories are you keeping right now? Do you currently have this or that field? Are you capable of keeping the field? That's going to help us to make the transition easier. So we are going to be sending out a survey within the next few months to try to see where the industry is at the moment to try to make that easier. So we'll rely on you to give us information so we can make it easier for you. Yeah?
One question. Oh, okay. Yeah, Pat Shago, CRNR. Quick question. I brought this up before, but are you making provisions for forms for modification and developing a process for that? A relatively tight frame and porting different structures into Excel format.
Sure. So what we've discussed is that 901 is aiming to get the information directly from the facilities. And we recognize that some facilities may have a mistake here and there. And we're hoping that the enforcement provisions are going to, deter people from making continuous mistakes, right? So once you make a mistake, we're like, hey, you made a mistake, you'll fix it, right? That's the hope. In the case of jurisdictions that want to check in on their information, we are considering having a designated person for jurisdictions and counties to be able to see the data that's been input by the facilities in advance of kind of the public release of information, so that they'll be able to see as soon as the data is input what the data looks like, and if they recognize some mistakes, then they can contact their facilities and have that discussion, and at that point we'll see if there's a need for CalRecycle to be involved in that interaction. If not, if they figure it out, great. If there needs to be further steps, then CalRecycle would get involved at that point.
I'll add, Pat, that we've got, I think that, there's a tendency to think of 911 reporting and 939 as being sort of, stuck together, and that one is dependent on the other necessarily. And while the 911 reporting, as was the DRS reporting, is going to inform the 939 reporting, and to be honest, other reporting requirements that jurisdictions have, other facilities have, the two are not inextricably connected. So we have information coming into 901, and if the information that comes in 901 is determined to be inaccurate or out of date and needs to be updated or corrected, then we'll have one process to allow for adjustments or updates or corrections to be made via the 901 reporting requirements. And then the jurisdictions have their own 939 requirements for their reporting, and they work through their land contacts and their and that process is somewhat different. And there are some other characteristics and requirements that can be adjusted based on their own requirements and provisions for those 50% diversion requirements. So they're connected in the sense that land staff and jurisdictions are going to be using data from 901 to inform their peers and their other reporting requirements, but they're not necessarily completely connected to one another and dependent on one another. So there can be revisions and corrections made via the land staff and the jurisdiction that is not necessarily the same as the 901 reporting requirement, and vice versa. So we're going to try to work together to make sure that everything is connected as much as possible, but there are different requirements for the two of them.
I understand that, but the question, because you have allocations, you have so much material moving through MERS, and inadvertently things happen, you just can't help it with these systems. I'm just wondering if you have provisions for making modifications, because you have enforcement provision, and if people are doing this inadvertently and want to correct it, how do they go about correcting it so that they don't have to deal with enforcement?
Yeah, I think, let me jump on this. I think that there will be provisions for revisions in relation to enforcement activity and to allow people to correct errors that they find in their data. There will also be the electronic annual report for jurisdictions to do we don't foresee any change, to the disposal modifications that jurisdictions can do now in relation to the disposal reporting system, which I think is what we're always getting at before. But yeah, we might have a little more.
Hi, this is Pauline Malone. I'm the solid waste enforcement manager. In terms of enforcement, basically we want people to be able to provide us with good data. So the request would be if we do notice misallocation or there is a discrepancy, we would work with that. We would allow that facility to provide and kind of look into why their data is different. And so the whole idea is to getting them back into compliance and not initially hit them, with an enforcement order or anything like that.
Local Sacramento County, I'd just like to invite CalRecycle staff out to our offices to go ahead and tour our DRS system that we have in place for our franchise haulers and our facility, all of our facilities within the county. About 10 years ago, we gave our dog and pony show, DRS dog and pony show, and we have to give it again so you can kind of see what we're doing there and the complexity of the information that we're collecting and how we're disseminating it.
Right. We're going to move to the next section.
There's just one more, and I think it's been addressed, but I just want to make sure we mention it just so the answer is clear.
Someone asked online, when you say counties that have to report anything, does that include the current electronic annual report?
And the answer is they're not related.
Right, the answer to that question is that, in case you didn't hear Lisa, the electronic annual report is the requirement that's outside of 901. So those two things are not directly tied.
And counties that run facilities will have to report for those facilities.
Okay. So who has to report? Like we said before, anybody who is handling all of those different types of materials for disposal, recycling, or composting would have to report, as long as they're above a certain threshold. So if we're talking about the threshold, the most basic and general threshold is 100 tons of material per quarter. So that's 100 tons in that 3-month period of recyclable, compostable materials or solid waste. For people who are processing only construction demolition materials like concrete and asphalt, we selected a higher threshold just considering the density of that material. So that threshold is 500 tons. And for organics that are directly land applied, the individual applying to the land would have to meet a lower threshold of 50 tons per quarter. So that if a hauler is out applying, then the hauler would have to report on that if they do more than 50 tons per quarter.
I'll clarify that's the hauler or the transporter or the other reporting facility. Anybody who has a reporting obligation that is directly applying organic materials to the land, tons per quarter or more would have to report to CalRecycle.
Right. So the difference is that for the composting regulations that came out, they refer to requirements on the land itself. So on a plot of land, we have
certain requirements. Since we're referring to land application and use, they don't have a reporting requirement. So the reporting requirement is on the person, whoever that is, who is transporting materials in excess of 50 tons per quarter to any place that is being direct land applied. As far as composting and in-vessel, we are piggybacking on the composting and in-vessel requirement, the composting regulations that came out last year. So any facility that's excluded from CalRecycle regulations for composting and in-vessel is also excluded from reporting. The exception here being wastewater treatment plants that are taking off-site organics in excess of 100 tons or over 10% of their throughput capacity per quarter. So this is an attempt to get at an increasingly popular option that we'd like to keep a pulse on as CalRecycle. We think it's going to be probably an important flow of food waste to these facilities, so we want to make sure that we know what's happening over there. And then again, we talked about the different thresholds for these food waste self-haulers that we put in quotations because it's a very specific definition, right? So just because a person is transporting 12 cubic yards or more of food waste doesn't necessarily mean they're a food waste self-hauler because they also have to meet other criteria, which we will talk about in the hauler section, to greater detail. But I saw some hands up. Start over here, or we'll work our way around the screen.
First, a question about food processors and the material they generate. I'm assuming you did not mean to include them, but I think probably do under this definition.
Right. So the food waste self-hauler is probably going to include people that we generally would prefer to not include, but that's a very specific statutory requirement that we have to include.
Nick, what do you mean by food waste processors?
No, not food waste processor, a food processor.
Food processors that you think are included that you know we should be.
Currently, probably most food processors, or at least a significant number of food processors, take the stems and other stuff that comes out the back end of the processing facility,
Sure.
And they directly land apply it. Never really been under your purview one way or another thing. And traditionally, not something we regulate.
Right. So you're thinking that a winery who's taking stems and skins from their wine producing operations that they generate on site as a generator, and then they haul it themselves to their own land, and they deposit it back onto their own winery footprint, that those facilities might be included under the regulations?
That's one option. There's the off-site material, not all necessarily taken to your own facility. You're talking about an example of a winery that has its own vineyard, but I think most canneries probably are disking in their material somewhere.
Sure.
I'm not sure I have the answer. It just came to mind as something that's not a sector that you guys traditionally interact with.
Yeah, I think that overall, that the food waste, that food manufacturers, whether it's a cannery or a sauce production or winery or what have you, that's producing some sort of food generated waste, whether that's stems and skins or soybeans or whatever. That's sort of in the group of agricultural waste. And if that's being hauled off to compost facility, then the hauler has an obligation to report to the compost facility what they're bringing and where it's coming from, the things they do, whether it's coming from commercial or residential or where have you. If they're taking it directly to land application facility, whether it's some piece of land or a farm or their own facility, it depends a little bit on how much they're taking and whether it's their own facility or whether it's some other facility, whether they're taking material from just their own operations, or if they're taking material from, neighboring operations. And so, some of it is the specifics of what we're talking about. I think you're right that if you're a winery and you're taking your own stems and you're dumping it back in your winery, that's outside of the normal purview. But if you're taking straw and manure and scrape skins and stems from multiple wineries and you're processing it and or distributing it across your own facility and other facilities and or going to a composting facility or AD facility, there's all kinds of different perspectives there, that some of which might be captured and some of which might not.
So that totally makes sense. But you have to think about like the almond hullers, and then have the almond hulls, they either sell to feed or to bedding, or you might go to a composting facility, might be directly line applied, might go to biomass. But most of the time, they probably avoid your systems actually. Sometimes it'd be a positive value material, sometimes it'd be a negative value material. Again, I don't actually know the answer. There's a conversation that you should probably have with the food processors.
For sure. I think you're right that every time we step into the world of organic, we step into a world of mass, honestly, and there's a lot of work. There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of different situations that it's hard to accommodate all of them all at once in one distinct set of regulations. We're trying to do that, and it does present itself an opportunity for either misinterpretation or missing something or accidentally including something that we meant to exclude. So, we try really hard to try to think of all of those situations and incorporate them. We'd love to have opportunities to talk to people to let us know, this doesn't make sense or this strange situation doesn't fit well into what you've written. We hope that what we've written so far takes into account the majority of what at least we understand to be the situation. But I think overall, when we talk with folks, you and others in the room, we've kind of generally got the same situation. We've got the same understanding. We want to have the same outcome. It's just a matter of getting the wording just right. So I think we're all on the same page. Let's just find a way to get the wording so that it actually lines up with what we're all thinking at the same time. So there's some specifics about the wording that we have in the regulations now that you think is unclear or could be changed. Give us some suggestions and we'll consider adjusting those to be a little bit more in line with what makes sense on the ground.
One more question, again, it might just be me not fully understanding, but in the second example of the excluded entities, they're above certain, they take above a certain amount of food and they're now included, right? How would a person taking the material there know whether or not the facility is included or excluded? Because they're the ones with the reporting obligation. So let's just say it's a wastewater facility that isn't necessarily, doesn't have a full-on digester, full-on food waste processing system, but they do take tanker loads of organic material, which most do. How would anybody bring in individual tanker loads know whether or not that wastewater facility is over the requirements here?
The requirement is on the facility, not on who's taking it to the facility.
Right, but there's a reporting requirement on the person taking it, right?
Right. So the facility who's receiving it would have the obligation, right? So I'm an AD facility, and I know that I have an obligation to report certain information. So now, when you, Nick, bring me material, because I have an obligation to report certain information, I need to collect that information from you. And so it's me as the facility, the receiving facility, who informs you as the delivering entity, the hauler, the transporter, what have you, that you have an obligation. You have to tell me when you pull up to my gate and you've got a tank full of liquefied organic, what have you, you have to tell me where does this come from, what is it? And so before you come into my facility and drop this material off, you have to tell me certain information because I have an obligation to report this to CalRecycle. So I'm telling you that I have this obligation, therefore you have this obligation to report to me so that I can therefore report to CalRecycle.
So in most cases like this, so if you're taking something to a wastewater treatment plant, that's considered a recycling flow, and there's no jurisdiction of origin or source sector requirement on recycling flows. So the only reporting that is required then is the material type. So if you know as the receiving facility that you're getting fats, oils, and grease, then that's what you report. And it should be, you should already know that just from your operation standards, right? If you're not gonna just throw in a whole tanker full of whatever and you don't know what it is into your digester generally, right? They have an idea of what's in there, and that's all we're gonna ask for in that case is the tons of how, of what you put in there.
So for the individual person delivering it to that entity, they're subject to the requirements if somebody like
If
the
requested.
facility
If
tells
requested.
them.
Yeah, so there, again, the requirement is on the facility, and the facility then requests that information from a hauler if they need it. In the case of a wastewater treatment plant, for example, their requirement is, again, like all recyclers, on the outbound material. So it's going to be biosolids, or sludge, or digestate. So it's going to be the outbound material, and that's what they're going to report. So they may not even need any information from the hauler in that case, because they don't have a jurisdiction of origin or source sector requirement on recycling. We'll talk more about that in a little bit.
One more quick question on that. So then how do you distinguish what proportion of the biosolids came from that tanker truck of cheese whey that completely digested in the...
That's a great question. We'll get to that. We'll talk more about that. And we don't have all the answers right now. Anyway. Any other questions?
I'll try to make it quick. I think I forgot it though, but the way I read the definition here is that sludge, we'll get to Class B sludge, is an organic, right? That needs to be reported, or is that? I'm a hauler hauling Class B sludge from wastewater municipality, land applying it directly to a field. Do I report it as a hauler?
Let me think about it.
So that would depend a little bit. So the facility that you're picking up from is likely to be a reporting entity.
I don't know. I mean, it's a
So
wastewater treatment plant.
the wastewater treatment plant, they're producing a digestate that very likely is going to need to be reported. So if they're sending it to direct land application via some transporter, you or somebody else, the fact that you're picking it up, you're driving the truck, makes no particular difference. It's the reporting entity who's sending it to direct land application who has the reporting obligation. There are potential opportunities where the facility who's generating that material might not be a reporting entity, but that would also most likely mean that you're also not a reporting entity. So you would be a transporter, not a hauler, because you're not picking up from generator, you're picking up from reporting.
So the wastewater treatment plant producing the Class B sludge is a reporting entity.
I actually don't think that would matter for your case. If you are a transporter picking up and land applying over 50 tons per quarter, you're going to have to report on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because a hauler does not include a person who transports solid waste from a reporting entity to another person. So the way if a wastewater treatment plant is not a reporting entity,
right.
Then as a land apply, I'm a hauler if it's not a reporting entity.
If it's not a reporting entity, then it's going to be a generator. And so the hauler has a requirement to report anything that's going from generator to end use.
Okay.
So either way, you're going to be in.
Okay, so I don't know if a wastewater treatment plant is a generator or a reporting entity.
And I think at that point, it's not going to matter for you.
I'd just like to know if you could define that, that'd be great.
It's going to be dependent on the actual operations of the facility. So there are going to be sort of some situations where there's some nebulous uncertainty, and in those situations, I would think that for a business entity operating, and I'm picking up from the facility, and I'm like, I don't know if you're a reporting entity or if you're a generator, because I don't know exactly all the details of your facility. The best thing for me to do to cover all my bases and protect myself as a business entity and make sure that I'm not going to be on the wrong side of these regulations is to report it. I report transporting, 100 tons of biosolids from, to the end use as direct land application. And it may be that once in a while you duplicate a reporting, and we'll catch that and understand how that goes. But it sort of is an abundance of caution, I suppose, on the side of a business entity that if you don't know, that you might as well do it. And particularly if it's a relatively small burden. I spent 100 tons or 500 tons or 1,000 tons or 20 tons or what have you of material to an end use. That end use was direct land application. That would be the sort of the safe way to go.
Would it be possible perhaps in the rule, because uncertainty is bad,
Yeah.
we can get some clarity on that, specifics? That'd be great. And then one last question on that, because you have raw sludge that isn't digested to Class B. You have Class B, and then you have Class A material. And I don't know where in this process is this a generator? Is this and report? There's a lot of wiggle room, and I hear a lot of uncertainty in this organics. I don't know what you say about organics. It's when you step in it or something like that. But literally, I think
we'll get there.
And then I have a problem with haulers, because sometimes I'll have maybe 18 loads of material out of a municipality, and I'll have 18 independent truckers. Are they all considered haulers or transporters, depending if it's a generator or regulated entity?
So from your perspective, the hauler and transporter requirements are not very different, right? They're basically the same requirements.
I see a hauler bringing it from the generator. And when I do composting, to my compost site, then I'm transporting compost. That's why I see that.
Right.
But with direct land app, I see myself as being a hauler if it's like a generator, but if it's a reporting entity, then I'm a transporter. So I just want some clarity. Then I'll report however you want it to be. But my gut says is that sludge is being defined as an organic. Therefore, it's being caught in this rule. Therefore, someone has to report it. I just don't know who reports it. And as I have subcontractors, do I report for the subs, or does every one of my 18 independent truckers report?
So those are great questions. We'll have to sort of think about how we clarify a little bit of that, because I understand that there is some uncertainty there, and as a facility that's operating a number of haulers, whether they be transporters or haulers or both or either, not knowing whether you're picking up from a reporting entity or a non-reporting entity is difficult for you to understand, and therefore you don't understand your obligation, because your obligation depends on their classification. So we'll think a little bit about how we might be able to clarify that, because we want to make it clear for people, and so that people are not thinking that they don't have to report when they should, or vice versa. And
that'd be helpful, because I see this somehow biosolids has to be caught up in this regime.
Sure, no, absolutely. It is included for sure. It's just, as you say, a matter of who it is that should be reporting and when.
Perfect.
Well, and just one thing to add quickly, I think because this is going to be an online electronic reporting system, I think, and people have to register who are reporters, I think there will be some ability to use tools in that system to check on things like, well, is the person I'm picking up from a registered processor or entity in this system.
And I just want to add that, this is why we have these meetings, because we can sit in our cubicles and brainstorm all day, but it really brings us down to earth when we have somebody being like, oh, this is my situation, and it's far more complicated than we would have imagined, in our cube. Thank you.
Coastal County, Sacramento, and before I ask the question I was originally going to ask, I'm going to jump onto this sewage treatment plant question. I think it might be easier for CalRecycle as a whole to just define BODW as generators. Because otherwise you open yourself to top of that, you got septic haulers. Septic haulers, if they take the septic waste to a BODW, deposit it there, then our data generators, and now the BODW is now the reporting entity, so you might just caution you clearly about how you want to approach the septic.
Right, because that might fall into our, off-site organic thing.
Yeah, well, I know where that shows up, I know Stack Regional up here does a pelletizing, drying pelletizing system, which then ends up in a market. So, and then to my original question / comment, your 100 tons per day, I'm just want to make sure that CalRecycle's intent was to rope in haulers that may haul as much as a ton and a half, a little over a ton and a half a day on a 5-day week, because that's what you're going to be bringing in. So you're going to be bringing in the junk haulers, a ton of different little self-storage, self-hauling type of operations. I wasn't sure if you wanted them all to be reporting entities, but with that threshold being as low as it is, that's going to be, I think it's going to be pretty significant. Plus, then you got all the recyclers that aren't even rolled in yet that haul small quantities of that as well.
Right. I just wanted to remind that generally the hauler is not going to report to us directly. So if you have a smaller junk hauler, you know, regardless of how much they're hauling to a landfill, for example, or a transfer station, the exchange of information is going to happen at the landfill or transfer station when they're asked at the gate where they're coming from, and that's where that tracking is going to happen as we envision it.
Which is how it happens under the disposal reporting system now.
Yeah, the problem there, and I know, Robert, I believe you got the Swan LPF letter, and in there we talked about the self-hauler definition and the contract hauler. And by that threshold, you're creating a hauler as a reporting entity, or at least having to report to us. Now it rolls into this source sector question, which is going to further complicate operations of facilities, and it will. I'll wait till we want to address that whole issue with source sector and how that affects facility operations when we get to that point.
Yeah, I think probably best to wait a little bit later to discuss the issue about self-haulers versus contract haulers and source sector and jurisdiction of origin and so on and so on. And as far as reporting entities, 100 tons per quarter refers to reporting entities to CalRecycle. So whether it's haulers reporting to a transfer station or a disposal facility, you know, those thresholds are totally separate. There really are no thresholds for those, whether it's 5 pounds or 5 tons or 100 tons. Haulers have to report to the facility that is dropping it off. It's just a matter of the threshold applying to facilities reporting to CalRecycle. But we'll discuss the distinction between self-haulers versus contract haulers a little bit later on.
Yeah, online? Okay. There's a lot more to get through, so keep it going. Okay. So here we started the discussion on what we're asking for solid waste, so things going to disposal, to a landfill, to transportation facilities, versus the type of information that we require for recycling and composting flow. So anybody who is a recycler or a composter generally is only going to have to report to CalRecycle material type and where. So tons by material sent where. And then for disposal flows, we'll be asking for the jurisdiction of origin and the source sector. And we did reduce the number of source sector categories from the first version down to these 3. I know that the recent version that you saw had 4 on there, but we did go ahead and remove disaster debris and move that under the requirements for disposal facilities and transportation to track. So we've moved that requirement outside of the source sector definition. And again, we're going to be asking on who it was sent to, except for in the case of end users, in which you can use end user categories instead of giving individual information. Any comments on this section? You have one in the back. We'll go from back to front this time.
No, she wants to get that first, so I
Well, it'll take him a while to get there, so we're here in the middle.
I understand, this is really next fall. I did not get this from reading this, and I'm fairly new to this, so forgive me if this is already gone over, but I think it was just alleging that perhaps at a composting site, it's not a composting site, an end user, right? Reporting, and I send off 10 tons a day as residual or that solid waste or odors. Am I reporting the jurisdiction of origin of those materials?
If you're over 10 tons a day of residuals, you would.
Wow.
Yeah.
As it's written now, yeah, we, if it's a substantial flow that's going to the landfill, we want to attribute that to the jurisdiction that created it, rather than to the jurisdiction that's hosting the facility. Because we've known also, that to be a problem in siting facilities. The jurisdictions have diversion requirements that they have to meet. They might not want a solid waste facility like a compost facility to be sited in their jurisdiction if they think that all of the residuals coming out of that is going to be assigned now to them, even though they're taking it from 5 different counties around them. So I know that this can be, challenging, but there's definitely, a reason why we want this information, and we'd be glad to chat about how to fulfill that requirement.
And that being said, if that threshold level doesn't make sense, and there's a better one that makes more sense, then we can talk about that as well. But it really is that issue of if it, for the other recycling facilities as well, most of them won't have to report like a MRF, where they have to look at both jurisdiction of origin and source sector, because a lot of the materials going to disposal. But if you got a really, really dirty recycling facility downstream, and your bales are mostly garbage, and you're sorting out just a few good things and sending the rest to disposal, well, you're going to have some other obligations if it's a large enough amount or a large enough percentage.
On this one, this is probably going to be the most heartburn of any of this regulation package. And the reason it does is because as facility operators, we're bringing in nearly almost a million transactions a year for facilities. And to have to granulate loads, and I'm going to step away from the ones that are very easy. The tractor truck coming from residential, those are easy. We know it's a franchise haul type operation. We can get that information already. But it comes down to the contractor, franchise type, or non-residential collected. Those represent the majority of our transactions. And just off the cuff, when I saw that, I did a calculation for our facility. This part right here affects 250,000 transactions a year for our 2 facilities. And come spend one day at our water recovery station. We have lines that get out our gate already, and we ask the simple question of, where's your load from? And then we set them the fee and we move them on their way. This will require, because we don't know, and the small haulers I mentioned earlier, under that smaller threshold, will fall into these categories. And now we will be asking not only, where's your load from? Did this come from where did it come from as well? Not what area is it from, but what did it come from? Did it come from a multifamily? What if it's a small contract hauler guy who's working for a multifamily complex? Does he become a commercial hauler? What are your definitions he does? And so this is going to seriously bind down our operations and force traffic out into our public highways, which we already have an issue with trying to prevent. So I'd like my Sacramento County request this source sector information be removed from the regulation. I'm not seeing the benefit of it per se, especially for the smaller loads. I don't think that was the intent of 901. I was heavily involved in AB 901 during this drafting and finalization, and I know that the source sector didn't enter into that at any point in time, and therefore I'm not sure why it had to show up here now. I understand you want to get a lot of information, but when you start knocking it down to these small levels, it's really going to impact facilities.
Reasonable.
Okay. We're going to talk about the
reasonable methods that we've come up with to try to address that a little bit later. I think it's a few more slides. But we hear you. We do think that this information is extremely relevant to the functioning of our department and to the functioning of meeting our mandates and of the infrastructure in the state. So we are very interested in pursuing this information. And we want to try to make this work, and we hope that the choices that we have given in the reasonable methods section are going to help to address some of those concerns. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Well, and one thing I would like to add is, it was good to hear you say some of the packer truck and residential stuff is easy, because that's the majority of the waste. When you're talking about the small trucks, lots of loads. If there's a way that we can get the big stuff right, and there's some other way that would make it simpler for you to do a different way, or another suggestion, think about that, because really we want to get the bulk of this right, and we don't want to burden facilities and have people out on the freeway waiting behind garbage trucks. So help us find a solution on this one.
Yeah, my name is Alberto Romero, Tyco Materials Construction, and I just want to, we have several, asphalt plants that receive wrap and also concrete, broken concrete. But does Tyco need to have several numbers, or we can, aggregate everything in just one ID number and report under one umbrella?
So the way that we're defining what a site is whether they're right next to each other. So if you have, two facilities next to each other, then you can report in one report. But if you have, 10 facilities all over the state, each of those facilities is going to have its own report.
Right. So if you have a facility that's bringing material in Sacramento from lots of places near Sacramento, and maybe on one part of your facility you have the receiving facility where you store it, and then right next door you grind it and grade it, and then next door to that you have your facility that makes it into asphalt that gets sent out the door to be laid down on the street somewhere. That's all one site, and so that also be reported as one facility. But if you have a facility in Sacramento, and one in Bakersfield, and one in Fresno, and one in LA, and one in Humboldt, all of those would have to report separately, because they're all separate facilities. If you have one in Sacramento, one in West Sacramento, one in El Dorado Hills, one in Folsom, one in Elk Grove, et cetera, I mean, if they're not, immediately adjacent to one another, they are separate sites, in which case they have separate reporting requirements.
And this might be a dumb question, but why? I mean, why is the reason to, if you want the total, material being recycled and go back into the street, why do you want to, know exactly every facility?
Sure. If that were the case, if that was what we were looking for, then you're right, we wouldn't need that. But that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is an understanding of how materials are recovered from generators and how they're processed, recycled, and returned back to the industrial complex or into disposal. And that, by its nature, requires a regional understanding. We need to know how material is coming out of the industry, the generators, the consumers, whether it be you and me, or whether it be cities and counties for digging up roads and so on. How it's coming out of that system, how it's moving through a processing system, whether it's just transportation or if it's crushing, grading, chemical, mechanical processing of various sorts, and then how it makes makes it back into the industrial system for a feedstock for another product, or ultimately makes it into the disposal system. So understanding how that whole system flows is the purpose of what 901 is getting at. And understanding how that works is what we need to get information for. And that's why we need a regional understanding and why an understanding of how TICR works across the entire state as a whole is insufficient. We need to understand how each of your facilities operate, because things might be different in Sacramento, Elk Grove, El Dorado, Hills, Granite Bay than they are in Bakersfield, Fresno, LA, San Diego, Humboldt, Encino, Redding, where have you. And knowing those differences will help us understand the system as a whole.
In his specific case, when TICR be an end user?
It depends on how they're operating. They're very likely going to be a processor and an end user.
Yes, and for example, because reality, like you said, things we learn. Reality is, for example, in a job like Highway 80, which we did, is in Vacaville and it's in Yola. All those grindings will come in to Perkins plant in Sacramento. And new asphalt, will go back out. And those grindings will stay there and be fed into new asphalt, because you can't feed the grinding, maybe 10% at a time. And those grindings that came from Solano County and Yolo County in a Walmart somewhere in El Dorado Hill.
Right, and that's not going to matter as much in case of the reporting, right? Because for recyclers, which you would be a recycler, you're only going to have to track the material type, which you already know, right? So you're not going to have to track where, if it's Sacramento County or if it's whatever, you don't have to worry about that. Because as a recycler, you only give us total tons for each site of material that you went out the door. And that's it.
Yeah, I was just going to add that clarity, because I think that's important in this discussion of understanding what you're going to have to report. And you said it very clearly earlier that if you're a recycler, you're not going to have to be tracking back to this information. If that can be somewhere very clear in the regulations for people that fall into that recycler category, it not only, it's very important for people understanding what they need to start tracking, putting a system in mind, and how they react on first impression of this rule. But it's important for the data systems they contemplate putting in place. Because essentially, the end user being his asphalt plant and his processing of the material being his recycling, that report creates some complexity.
Yeah, and the last version that we put out, already has edits on it in terms of clarifying language after we received some comment from the public about some of those sections. So, there's already changes made, and there will be more changes made to make sure that things are clear. We do have a series of flow charts coming up that I think are going to help to clarify who's going to do what. So I think if we get through that, it will be helpful. We have
Right, so I'm just trying to figure out the solid waste that comes to a facility as defined as solid waste does not include an organic material that actually ends up in organic recycling or composting facility, correct?
So solid waste is just going to be whatever mixture is going to disposal.
It's that segment, that section of material that is not composted. In other words,
You're saying residuals that come out of the composting facility or an organic
it's
recycling.
really the origin of those materials that you're interested in, not the origin of, say, an ag material, even though it may have come, or a food material that may have come from a food processing facility that does get fully composted.
Right.
So it's the trash that goes along with it.
Yeah. So for example, if you're taking, if you're a really large composting facility and you have past that threshold that you're going to have to report jurisdiction of origin on your residuals, say you know that you have an ag stream that's really clean, that's just ag and there's no residual.
you can just tell us for where you know that contamination is coming from, right? So if you have a large ag stream that's clean and you have, a residential food waste route that you know is dirty, you can tell us this is where the residual is coming from because you know there's no residual coming from ag.
I'll just say we've got one more, just behind Elliot here, and then, we've got Veronica, but I'd like to move on because we do have a lot, more ahead of us, and I think we have a lot of clarification coming ahead of us that I think might help, alleviate some of the concerns and questions that might be coming. So let's go here, and then Veronica, and we'll move forward.
Wanted to know the connections also concerned with that source sector. And I have a question for you. I mean, it would be costly for our industry to put up some information. And doesn't that cost also impact on have an impact on the regulation as you would cost and economic?
Yes, absolutely. We are taking into account people's need to update software and to track that information into the cost analysis. But we will talk about the source sector reporting requirements later. So stay tuned, and we'll talk a lot more in depth about that. But I really want to get going to the next section. Yeah.
And just really quickly before Veronica, just to be clear, I know it's semantics, but it's not a cost benefit analysis that we're performing. We are doing an economic analysis as required by the Department of Finance and the Office of Administrative Law pursuant to rulemaking process. And we do a lot of analysis about the economic impact to private businesses and local jurisdictions of the state, but it is not per se a cost benefit analysis as sort of the academic economists might say it is. So just to change the language, it's not a cost benefit analysis. We're doing an economic analysis. So Veronica, please go ahead.
You guys need to move on. Veronica, CRC strongly supports the comments made by the COBOL. Source sector reporting just adds a layer of complexity that is really unadvisable to structure as you guys are creating this new reporting system. We want streamlined reporting. We want reduced opportunity errors. We want that good data. As folks are signing up, there's going to be a lot of trial and error in the system, and there's this other complicated piece of getting all the reporting entities that are not yet registered. So anything we can do to make this simplified and easier initially is really advisable. And again, this source sector appears to be outside the scope of the original legislation. So just strongly support those comments and hope they'll consider removing the source sector from the reporting. Okay, we're going to move to the next slide.
Supporting what Sacramento County is on.
Okay. We have an online comment supporting what Sacramento County and Veronica stated. Thank you. We keep track of those comments as well, so anything that's typed into that comment box will be saved, and we will be able to look at it later as well. So unless it's a question that needs an answer, we're going to go ahead and move on. So here's the beginning of our requirements by reporting entity type. Hopefully this will help to clarify some of the questions. It is a complicated system. There are a lot of players. There's a million different things that can happen along the stream, and we're trying really hard to make this as simple as possible. So, bear with us here. So here we have haulers. On the right, we have haulers that are taking stuff to disposal facilities, transfer stations, MRFs, composters, recyclers. They're not going to report to CalRecycle. They're going to give information to the receiving facility. If they're taking it to a disposal facility, they're going to give that jurisdiction of origin, source sector information to them. Same for transfer stations and MRFs. The reason why we add, we'll talk about that later. The recycler composter. A hauler that's taking to a recycler composter doesn't need to report anything to them unless they request it because they fall under that 100-ton residual that makes them have to report as a MRF. So unless they request that information from the hauler is under no, they don't have to tell them anything in particular. They don't report to CalRecycle on that book. On the left-hand side are the things that are reported by haulers to CalRecycle. And these two things are exports and directly to an end use. So this is where that land application fees will be captured. This is where anybody who is taking a route really close to the border and they're actually going to another state to a disposal facility, that's where this is going to be captured. And again, reminding us that for the rest of these flow charts, anything that's blue is generally a disposal flow that requires a jurisdiction of origin source sector information. And the things that are in purple, I hope that can you guys tell the difference between those colors? Yeah, okay, good. And purple is going to be recyclables, and for that we're going to require material type. Okay? The orange bubble, that's us, CalRecycle. That's the information flow, that's where we're going. And the direction of the arrows is generally the direction of material flow, just to kind of explain how these charts are set up. The entity in the middle and the green box is who we're talking about reporting at this moment, right? So other entities on this slide are going to have their own reporting requirements. We're going to talk about those each separately, okay? Any questions on the collars from this slide? We'll talk more about food waste collars on the next slide. So anything about non-food waste self-collars at this time?
I think we might push through all the facility type reporting slides here, which are going to be the next half a dozen or so, just so we can get through some of the basic stuff and make sure that we're not doubling back. So we'll talk about the different reporting entities, go through the different flow charts that are like this, and then we can sort of wrap back and see if people have questions about all of the previous slides. So let's move on.
We'll go ahead and do that. And these presentations, flow charts, will be up on the website if they aren't. I thought it was enough, but we'll go ahead and double check, make sure that they're up. They will be up, so you guys will have access to them as well. We'll talk about food waste self-collars there at the end. So this is the flow for transfer stations and MRFs. And the challenge that we had here was that, there might be several stops along this chain for material. You might have material go to a transfer station and then go to a MRF, and then those residuals might go to a second MRF before they end up in another transfer station, and then they go to the landfill. So in an attempt to make those data transfers more streamlined, we've actually asked a transfer station and MRF to report what's coming in from another transfer station MRF, so that we can track the information ourselves and then apply that to the reporter. So for example, if this transfer station is receiving material from one other transfer station or from a MRF, they're going to tell us we got 10,000 tons from this MRF. And in addition to that, we got, 500 tons from this jurisdiction and 600 tons from that jurisdiction from direct haul. And then our system is going to integrate those numbers as they get passed along to the next person, so that we can try to keep track of all that complicated stuff instead of having each person trying to figure it out on their own. So that's why we're asking for the inbound materials here. But ultimately, for a MRF, the jurisdiction of origin information is on the residuals. So we are going to provide an opportunity for a MRF to revise those numbers based on their information. So if they know that their incoming residual rates are the amount of material coming in is very different from the residual rates coming out. For example, if you have 10 very clean jurisdictions and one very dirty jurisdiction, and you know that their allocation is going to be different, we're going to have an opportunity for them to change that number, but the default is going to be whatever is coming in is going to be allocated as what's coming out for the residuals, in order to try to keep things as simple as possible, while giving people an opportunity to say, no, actually, this we know from our source, or we know from the information that we have, that this jurisdiction is actually more dirty, or these jurisdictions are more clean. As far as reporting for the recycling fraction, again, there's no jurisdiction of origin requirement for material that's being recycled. So a MRF that's making bales does not have to provide jurisdiction of origin or source sector information for those bales, only for the residuals going to landfill, again, so that we can better understand the true flow of material through the state and those jurisdiction allocations. We're going to move on to the next slide here. We'll talk about that. For disposal facilities, we're going to follow that same model of whatever is direct hauled, you're going to get the jurisdiction of origin information from the hauler. For things that are coming from another facility, like a transfer station or MRF, you're just going to tell us it's coming from the transfer station or MRF, and then we can try to interpolate that information in our database and provide that to the facility at the time that they're doing the report. For materials that are beneficially reused, we added, I think this was in the first version, but we require just the jurisdiction of origin material type for ADC, AIC, and other beneficial reuse. And we're asking for a bit more clarity on the usage of that other beneficial reuse category. And then we also have the requirements for disaster waste, designated waste, and Indian material that has already been in the regs in DRS already, so that's not new at all. And then if the disposal facility is sending materials out for recycling, so if they have a drop-off at the case, and there's people, stashing washing machines and refrigerators and, logs or whatever outside of the case, and then they send that off to recycling, they'll report on that by disposal times of that material. And in any case that there's any material generated at one facility, for example, ash from a transformation facility that needs to be disposed at a landfill, they'll just have to report that material as well. I'm hoping these are helpful. I'm not getting a lot of facial expressions. These are the categories of beneficial reuse that are in the version right now. We heard some concerns that this is too many, and we agree. We'd like to condense these down to categories that make sense for the operations of landfills. But when we look at it, we say, we could break this down in probably 5 different ways as to what makes sense and how to collapse these categories. So if any of you would like to take a stab at it and try to give us, fewer categories that make sense here, we are definitely open to that. I'm just going to plant that seed there and let it grow, because we still have something to see after here.
I'm just going to add a bit about beneficial reuse. The purpose for gaining more information on the other categories is because we've seen in recent years a pretty significant increase in beneficial reuse going to these quote-unquote other categories for which we have no information. So looking to get better information about it, and these are the categories that have been approved by the LEAs for beneficial reuse. So we've identified those here in the regulations, but as we've heard from some folks, these are not necessarily what operationally folks are separating materials out into. And so, as Wanda said, if there are broader categories that combine some of these into groups that make more sense based on your operational needs and how you're actually using this material, that will allow for a more effective and efficient reporting, and would not add additional segregation or tracking information at your facility. That's what we want to hear back from you. So if you're separating certain things for 1, 3, and 7, and that's all in one category, you always put those together, let us know, because that makes sense for us. And we can at least get better information about what this nebulous other category is, while not requiring you guys all to, further sort or categorize materials above and beyond what you're already doing. But to have, hundreds of thousands of tons of material a year going into sort of who knows what this material is and what it's going to, is something that we need to get better information on.
Here's a piece on recyclers and composters. As we talked about before, the only requirement on recyclers and composters is the material type going out. So we're sending, reporting the tons by material type sent to each person, unless that person is an end user, in which case you can use the category that we provided. Here I had a placeholder for this discussion of the definition of organics that we came up with. This is the definition that we came up with. We added a little bit to it since the last version was out. So we called out digestates and biosolids specifically. We also have this other word, sludges. We're not sure if that's strictly necessary if we call out digestates and biosolids specifically, but we kind of didn't want to exclude anybody categorically, especially in the case of food slurries that are going to wastewater treatment plants and stuff like that. So just wanted to float this by you guys, see how you're feeling about it, and this is your time.
There you go. Right, so Annual Association of Compost Producers. So the question that a number of us had is, why did you need to define organics as a new term when it didn't? And we worked on this in the Title 14 stuff for a year or two, and we came up with, and it is now in statute, the definition of compostable material, and also the compostable material handling operation or facility. And those did not appear in the 901. Instead, you introduced a new term called organics, which now makes it more confusing, I think, after we went through it already once. So, unless there's a great rationale for introducing a new term, I think we would argue that you stick with the terms that we already put in Title 14. So that's just it's a comment and a recommendation. Also, you still didn't include the term manure in here, because I know that in municipal systems, not just in ag systems, you do get a fair amount of manure that goes into the waste system and ends up in landfill. So
yeah, we did not include manure in this, and that might be more of a policy decision than strictly, whether or not things are or are not organic. And the reason is because, let me think. Okay, so in our waste characterization studies that we've done, we see that it's, less than 0.02% of the waste stream is manure. So the actual tons of manure going to landfill is very, very small. And we felt that it might go into a field that's regulated by a lot of other entities already that have their own programs. So, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'd say for the manure side of things, we're probably, moving into the realm of TDFA more, and so that's more why we excluded manure out of the reporting requirements for 901. I'd say that we incorporated a new definition for organic, because we're requiring reporting on materials that are not being composted. So as you mentioned, the definitions that have already been sort of worked out are specifically related to composting regulations, and composting materials, composting facilities, et cetera, but we're including organic materials that are not being composted, that are instead being recycled. So organics recycling that do not meet the definition of organic composting, we still want to include. And so there lies the reason why we have to incorporate a new definition to incorporate materials that can be and are composted, as well as materials that can be and are not composted but are recycled. So these are materials that are chipping and grinding into mulch, because mulch is not composted, does not meet the definition of composting, but is organics recycling. Direct land application is not composting, but is organic recycling. And so to incorporate those materials, we had to expand the definition beyond that which we had for the composting regulations, because there are uses for organic materials that are not composting. So that's why we incorporate this new definition that's broader than the existing one. So hopefully that explains why we have this new piece here.
Well, but I think you've ended up introducing a problem that Nick pointed out earlier, and that is by creating that distinction between recycling and compostable materials handling, which is in statute already, and it does include chip and grind facilities being regulated. I think the big problem here is if you are recycling, like I understand, if you're taking a chip and grind material and remanufacturing it into lumber or paper, there's a lot of organic material that goes back into just being organic material. But as soon as you put it out on the land, it now is going to be degrading, and now you have to deal with contaminant issues. And one of the purposes of bringing chip and grinders into this was precisely to benefit not only the water board, but also CDFA in terms of chemical and biological contaminants, which you guys don't regulate, but you guys regulate the physical contaminants, and we've still got issues there. From a composter's perspective, or a land applier's perspective, or a landowner's perspective, they've got to deal with whatever contaminant comes their way, and the water boards are going to look at the chemical contaminants that leach into the water, and CDFA is going to look at the biological contaminants that could infect, local crops. But the composter, it would be much better if we had consistent definitions where we were dealing with all three of those contaminant classes at once. So and I thought we kind of were getting there with the compostable materials definition. It's compostable materials. It's not materials that are going to be composted. It's materials that could be composted because they're biologically available, but they may not be biologically available. I mean, all wood rots ultimately. All paper can rot, but it's biologically available, but it could be remanufactured into new materials that contains that cellulose. Cellulose is the ubiquitous, building.
We'll take a look at it again and see.
So I think you can just get by with the compostable materials definition, and it would actually tighten up the concerns that Nick brought up, rather than introducing more ambiguity with this new organics term.
We'll take a look at it.
So we'll make that recommendation in writing, and we'll look for it in the next iteration of the reg.
Thank you. Let's move on to, I think we can take a much needed break at slide 21 after the who are end users and have a big slug of questions, but maybe we'll take questions here by Nick. Or Nick. Go ahead.
I haven't totally thought through what the implications of something being called organic really are. I know for at least one of the reporting categories, you have to report by material type, and you have organic lumped in together. Since your organic definition sort of includes two separate things, it includes the products that go into an organics recycling facility and the products of that organics recycling facility. So whether that's compost, mulch, biosolids, digestate, compared to food waste, green waste, yard trims, et cetera. At least for purposes of reporting, it seems like it might make sense to disaggregate those two in terms of what you're taking and
well, facilities wouldn't have to report anything about what they're taking.
Right.
So they only have to report what they send out if what they're doing is recycling or composting. So if a facility is taking in, who knows what, maybe yard trimmings, and they're chipping it, they send those wood chippings to a compost facility, all that facility has to report is, I send out 5,000 tons of wood chipping. They don't have to say that it came from, forest or from urban, yard trimmings or what have you. They just say what left their facility. And then a composting facility then sends out 500 tons of compost. They report, I sent out 500 tons of compost. They don't have to say I got 100 tons of, grass clippings and 100 tons of manure and 500 tons of wood chips. They just say what left their facility.
Let me clarify my question a little bit. I think I was very clear. So you say that you must report the amount of each of the following materials that you process, sell, transfer, dispose. One of the categories under that is organic.
Yeah, we actually reworked that language because we didn't find it to be misleading, but what that section says is the whole, are you in or are you out? If you recycle organic as a broad category and define, you're in. That's what that's meant to say. It's not meant to say, tell us, of your residual coming out, tell us how much is organic. That's not what it's meant to say.
Well, I'm wondering, you probably want more granular information. You want to know if it's biosolids or if it's
and we will, and that's the material type that we're going to get to here really soon.
But aren't you lumping it all into one material called organics, or am I misinterpreting?
No, we're not.
Yeah. It's a multi-stage process. So the first step is, are you handling any of these materials? Yes, you're in. No, you're out. Okay. After that, you are handling any of these materials. Are you handling them above any of these thresholds? 100 tons for standard materials, 500 tons for concrete, asphalt, shingles, etc., or 50 tons for organic being directly landslide. If no, you're not above those limits, you're out. If yes, you're in. Now, you're in, you go to your reporting requirements. I am a disposal facility who handles these materials above these thresholds. What do I have to report? I have to report jurisdiction of origin and source sector for all the tons that I dispose. If I am a composting or recycling facility, what do I have to report? Well, I have to report the tons by material type at the level that I send them out of my facility. So if I am handling organic and I am sending finished compost out of my facility, I report tons of finished compost. If I am an organic facility that's handling chipped wood waste and I send chipped wood waste out of my facility, I report chipped wood waste. If I am a facility that's sending out green waste, I report green waste.
But you still end up aggregating biosolids composters and green waste composters into one.
If what's coming out is compost, that's the only thing we're getting out of it, and that's our limitation. We can't get on the inbound material.
Well, you could, I think, if you separated at least those two categories. You might want that information because the two are very different. Just from a policymaking perspective, you might want to have separate information on where biosolids are going versus where green waste is going. Right.
Yeah, we would love that, but
we might very well like that. That's true.
Yeah.
But the way the statute's written is that composting and recycling facilities only have to report what leaves their facility and not what comes into their facility. So we're going to have a hard time getting to a place where we get compost that came from biosolids versus compost that came from green waste or other sources, because we only get what leaves the facility.
Let's just finish out this last flow chart, and then we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll get to answers to questions. Okay?
Okay, transport workers, last one. In most cases, transporters will not report, just like in most cases, haulers will not report. The people who have to report are basically brokers, right? So we introduced this concept of possession into this section to try to avoid the double reporting of, if I'm a MRF and I use a transporter to send this to the recycler, we don't want the MRF to report it and then the transporter to report the exact same material and then, and so on. So we've introduced this concept of possession, which means if you buy that material and now you decide what you're going to do with it. If you're a broker and you buy a material and now you've decided that you're going to sell it to someone, and that facility that provided that material to you is not in that conversation at all, they don't know what's going on, they just know I sold it to Ted, and Ted is going to do whatever. And the facility that made that material says, I gave 100 tons of wood waste to Ted, and Ted now is a reporting entity because he has to tell the department what he's done with it as a broker. That's the only instance, export and this brokerage is the only instances really in which transporters are going to report. So if the transporter is just a guy in a truck that was hired by a MRF to take the stuff to another place, they don't have to report. In that case, the MRF who is sending stuff via a contracted person is responsible for reporting that flow. So with that in mind.
So really, you get the determining factor is, do you, as an entity, own the material and get to determine where you take it? If you own it and you can sell it to me, or to Monica, or to John, or to Elliot, or keep it yourself, or do whatever you want with it, then you are a reporting entity. You're essentially a broker, maybe a transporter, maybe some other facility. But if you were just hired, excuse me, if a MRF just hires you to drive a truck and take this truckload of plastic pellets from my place to their place, you don't have a reporting obligation. But if you pick it up from somebody and you get to decide where it goes and you get to decide who buys it, you can sell it or not sell it as you please, then you are now a reporting entity because you have legal ownership. You own that material. You get to decide what to do with that material. So that's the big differentiation here. If you get to decide what happens to it, you own it, you report. Somebody else owns it, and they decide where it goes, and you're just driving the truck between point A and point B. You have no reporting obligation.
Okay.
Finish up with end users.
You want to go through end users? I think we should take a break now and let people stretch their legs maybe before we get into end users. 5 minutes, bathroom break, leg stretch. Please make it quick so that we can get all your questions answered.
Crunch and chase that. And then that, so the idea that
juice back into the
Well.
zone there.
Starts up just tonight.
Your thought juice is flowing. Some people may have percolated out. Maybe they were happy, so they left. They're just like, this is great. I have nothing else to say. So. Okay. All right, let's start talking about end users. I'm just going to dive right in. Who are end users? As Nick alluded to earlier, we have a definition that we try to make up here. And as you can imagine, it's not the easiest thing to try to make one definition to apply to any kind of combination of things that might happen in the world of waste recycling. So we gave it a shot, and this is what we have right now. An end user is a person who uses a product made from recycled material after a level of processing that results in the material replacing or significantly resembling a virgin material or becoming a homogeneous mixture such as aggregate, crush miscellaneous space, mulch, compost, or materials suitable for direct line application. And the end user categories that we came up with are here, and this is a slightly different list than what was in the version that you saw. We did, talk about it a little bit more since then, so we've made some changes here. We've namely removed the intermediate products because we weren't sure what that meant either. So, and then we added construction uses to try to make it more clear. And as far as, we do say in the regulations that we're going to ask for this category by region. And we have not yet defined what region means. And part of that is because it's quite challenging, and it depends on basically how many of those types of people exist out there, whether or not, for confidentiality reasons, we're going to know who it is, or other people might know who it is, but that's part of the challenge. As far as CalRecycle making information publicly available in a report, we only make things publicly available when we have at least 3 people or entities in a group, and we make kind of group, this is how much compost was sold, or this is how much stuff was sold for a region or an area to kind of protect the confidentiality of certain things. So as far as regions that would be determined for a public information, that would be determined based on how many of those entities exist within an area. So we haven't decided yet, and we were hoping maybe you guys could help us as far as what a region means. If there's something that already exists that we could piggyback off of that you all are used to in your regulatory world, that might make sense for us to use, please let us know. And I think
first, I want to touch on some high-level things, particularly related to one of the earlier comments about direct line application and users, and seeming confusion about the fact that an end user does not include those that reduce size, but does include those who direct line apply. And it's a point of clarification, but I think it's important that the language says it does not reduce size for the ease of processing. So if you're reducing size so that you can directly land apply versus you're reducing size so it's easier to pump through a pipe or to handle, there's a difference between that. And we are explicitly calling out the direct land application as being an end use. So I don't think that there will be any confusion about the fact that material being sent towards direct land application is considered an end use, since we specifically call it out. And I think that the clarification that end use is not only bale, wash, or reduce size, but the ease of processing clears up a little bit of that confusion. And, you know, we've also got in the category that land application is an end use category. So hopefully that's enough to clear up any confusion about organic and direct land applied not counting as an end user. That is an end user and is very explicitly called out as being an end user. I also want to add that for the regions, as Alonka said, we don't have a clear direction of where we want to go. We want to have some indication of where this material is going. Also understanding that we don't want to be stepping on a lot of trade secrets and customer lists about exactly where it's going. And as Alonka also alluded to, that there will be a difference between what is reported to CalRecycle versus what is reported out from CalRecycle to outside entities, the general public, et cetera. And on the latter, we will be held to confidentiality issues regarding what is public information versus what is confidential and trade secrets and proprietary, et cetera, which are discussed at length elsewhere. But the information that we gather from facilities, for the regions, we're still debating. We've heard some good feedback from folks about what regions might make sense, and we'd like to piggyback with other regions that are already established, so that we don't have conflicting or overlapping regions. The big one that was proposed that I think makes sense for us, certainly, and as we heard from certain of our stakeholders, it made sense for them, but we'd like to get some feedback from others, or you sort of piggybacking on the regional water board region, which would give us plenty of good resolution for our purposes, and also take advantage of the fact that people already sort of operate under a lot of these same boundaries already. Certainly in the composting organics world, you know, they're already sort of tied into the regional board, water board world. Not everybody else in the solid waste management recycling world is in that same group, but you know, at least it's a group of categories, regional categories that is existing and people understand and work under already, and at least it's a starting point. So I would like to put that out to the group as a potential recommendation for reporting for the region as we define them at the moment. So I'll open up to the group now, and I think I saw another hand up earlier.
Larry has more.
I was more looking at the definition of end user. So the level of processing, is that done by the end user, or is that done before the end user gets it?
Before. So it's
The end user is the person who uses the material after this level of processing.
If I compost and put it on the yard, I'm an end user?
yeah.
So if you make compost, you're not an end user. If you use compost, you are an end user.
Piggyback on that, and we'll make this recommendation in writing, it would be useful to have the bagging operation. If we're going to define that, where they're buying finished compost, then not necessarily by this definition, they're using it, but they're packaging it and then selling it. So it could easily be interpreted as a broker or a transporter. So, so it might be useful to explicitly state that a bagging operation for the purposes of these regulations would be considered an end user.
I think that would be an easy fix, and in line with what we've been thinking about a bagging operation. They're buying finished compost. They're using it. They're using it to create a product. They're using it to create a
sweetener product,
whatever.
Yeah.
So they are an end user of that finished compost. So, you know, to the extent that we can clarify it with a short insertion, I think that would be pretty easy to do.
Okay, and then as far as the region, I think we would agree that the water
questions. First of all, how do you count, say, a farm that has on-site chipping and grinding and then land application? It's pretty common that unprocessed green waste is taken to a location, chipped and ground, and spread.
Yeah, so we have a provision in the first section of the who's in, who's out, that people who are generating, processing, and using material on the same site are out.
They're out.
They're out.
No, forget the generate part. You're taking municipal green waste,
So you take stuff from offsite.
and then you're processing it and applying it at the same time. You
Right.
wouldn't meet the definition of an end user.
Right, so you would have, what we would look at is, you've got a site that has two operations. Right, one operation is a shipping and grinding operation, and one operation is a direct land application operation. Right, and the shipping and grinding operation is an organic recycler, and a potentially reportable entity if they meet thresholds, et cetera. And the direct land application operation of the site is probably an end user, and therefore no reporting obligation. So if the processing side, the chip and grind side, is in excess of the reporting threshold, then they would have to say, I sent 5,000 tons of chipped organic material to end use, and that end use category was direct land application, and that land application region was whatever, wherever it was. Some of it would be on their own site, maybe all of it was on their own site. But it would be whatever region, if we stick with this waterborne region, waterborne region 5, this region, and we would never know whether it was on their own site or on somebody else's site or a combination of the two, but that's how we would split it.
That's my second question, but before I get to that, that makes sense. Well, you should make that a little more explicit than this. Because they could argue that they are by definition on it. It's two separate sites, two different operations on the same site, that all makes sense. You should clarify it.
Yeah, we found very similar concerns among other vertically integrated industries where we have facilities that are doing processing, maybe they're generating and they're also processing and they're potentially partial end users, but they're also sending some off-site or they're taking some from off-site. It's very complicated when you get into the details of facilities that are either fully vertically integrated or partially vertically integrated. But you're right, adding a little bit more clarification to make it clear who's in and who's out and under what circumstances is important to make it clearer for folks.
And then on the second thing that you raised was actually my second point. I would say I strongly disagree with you not asking for destinations of where materials land applied. I think that was part of the motivation for doing this bill. It was the main reason why my organization supported the bill. And if you, for example, at the water board land application meeting, they said, well, our plan for enforcement is going to wait until we start getting the data from 901 about where this material is going so we can start enforcing. To not have that information kind of reduces the whole purpose of both that water board process that's waiting for that information, and in my opinion, the point of the bill. So I would maybe make a distinction between commodity materials that have a value and negative value materials that are, for lack of a better word, disposed of in a direct land application. Because I completely agree on the markets for commodity materials. That completely makes sense. But for the land applied green waste that has a negative value or close to it, that same level of confidentiality is not.
Sure. I mean, I understand your point of view. It's difficult for us to distinguish, end users of one variety versus end users of another variety, particularly when we have very similar end users. Direct land application of organic material could involve me going to the flood plant, picking up load full of chipped trees, right, for mulch in my own property. And I'm an end user in that situation because I'm directly land applying chipped wood material 5-acre parcel and buying a lot of it, versus somebody who's, got a 5,000-acre parcel and they're buying, 1,000 cubic yards of material. It's somewhat difficult to distinguish where that, crosses one line or the other, especially given some of the feedback that we've received regarding, the intention of the statute and the anticipation of the protection of where material is being spent. And I think John has something to add too.
Yeah, well, I want to make the distinction between what's required in the reports and then what's required as far as records that can be retained or need to be retained, and then we can go look at it. So this talks about what has to be submitted in the reports. And the reports that we get, it will be by end-use category. So we'll be able to identify who is sending stuff to land application and how much in general region. But once we do that, we can either request or go view records for specifics, if there are specific things that we identify that are problems or that we want to look at.
Would you have access to Polar X, that they pick up 500 tons of green waste, take it to their transfer station, and then haul it out and land apply it, and they just give you a region? Would you have access to that information? Would they have to hold on to where they?
So the hauler wouldn't have much.
Hauling company, not hauler.
Right. So the transfer station, receives some organic material and they sell, 500, or they send 500 tons to direct land out on, parcel XYZ, 1,000 acres, field, what have you. They would need to keep the record necessary to substantiate the fact that they sent 500 tons to region, whatever it is down there, 6 or whatever. They add it all up. I think 10,000 tons total for region 5. They would have to have records to substantiate the fact that they sent 5,000 tons to region 5, and so they might have 5,000 to region 5 and 2,000 to region 4 and whatever if they're sending stuff outside of those regions. So they'd have to have the records to say, I sent 500 to this address and 700 to that address and 5,000 to this address and 200 to that address. And those addresses fall within, this jurisdictional boundary or that boundary. So yes, they would have to have the records to show that they sent it to a particular address that was in that region.
But we would hope that either you or the water board will then go and see what that address is to enforce your regulation. And if you are planning on doing that, then why not require that reporting to begin with?
Right. So the question is whether, CalRecycle and the water board might carry out enforcement action based on our regulations or theirs, based on the addresses that are provided by facilities that are sending material to direct land application. I can't particularly speak to, certainly not what the water board might do with their enforcement action, but for CalRecycle's enforcement action, there's information gathered from a number of sources. And 901 has its particular focus for what we're gathering information for, and it might be used to inform other activities, whether it be audits or investigations or enforcement activities. But it's not the primary focus of gathering the information for 901. So as John said, we'll be gathering information that will help identify areas where organics are being directly land applied. And if we find we need to investigate further, there are requirements for facilities to maintain records so that we'll get a greater level of granularity once we go investigate. But it won't be provided on an ongoing basis from every facility and every quarter for forever. So yes, we will have the ability to do it. It just won't be something that we'll get all the time.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I think we can help you out in the back.
Real simple. I don't need this fight. Robert, response to your region, take a look at the Caltrans district map. Might be more appropriate from a waste shed
Doug. Just for those online who might not have heard, Doug suggested that rather than using the regional water board region, that we look at the Caltrans region. So we'll look into that and see whether that might be a more appropriate region to use. Thank you.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
It's better. Caltrans is better.
Okay.
For waste.
All right, we got a second in the ring.
Sorry for waste shed.
Is there a
Okay.
reason why it would have to be the same categories of regions for all the different types?
For
For
simplicity.
organic,
For simplicity.
the water board region makes the most sense. For, all the stuff that Stryker deals with, obviously Caltrans.
Well,
We'll have to weigh the pros and cons of things.
Yeah, there may be facilities like a MRF that has materials construction materials to some people and organics to others, and having them use two different sets of, might be tough, but we can look at it.
Okay. Regional methods. So we have a few more slides. So as we talked about, material type is required for material sensitive recycling. So we're asking for material types to be reported at the level of segregation at the time of sale or transfer. So we want this to be as easy as possible for the regulated community so that you can match your own records as how you're already tracking your information in your tracking, your invoicing or your whatever, however you're keeping track of your information now. So we want to allow for that flexibility by providing material types at the individual level, at the category level, and then, residuals and mixed stuff is just going to be solid waste, right? So when you see that transfer stations have they have to tell us material type, that material type if it's going to disposal is going to be solid waste. We did include into the MRF requirements that they give us material type when it's going to disposal. And if there's, a bale of 1 through 7 plastics that's going to disposal, we would like to be able to keep track of that. So we've asked for material type. But in most, if you're just doing residuals, you're just doing waste, that's just going to be solid waste going to disposal. As far as if you're baling cardboard, you're going to report cardboard. We don't want people to report mixed paper when it's really cardboard. Okay, so we really want people to be specific about what they're reporting to match their own record. And there was a little bit of confusion here on the material type, I think, from the waste sector as far as do we need to characterize the waste that we're taking in? No, that's not what we're asking for. If things are going to disposal, if you're going to the landfill, they're solid waste. And that's the only material type that applies there, unless it's a bale of something or something that's segregated, that's, because of lack of markets now going to disposal. We would like to know that. But there's not ever going to be a need for you to sort your garbage or your residuals to tell us what percent of what materials are in there. That's not going to be the case at all. Hopefully that clarifies. We heard a lot of concerns about that.
It's a pretty low threshold, right? I mean, if somebody off the street walked up and said, "What is that?" and you'd say, "Well, that's a PET bottle, or that's newsprint, or that's cardboard, or that's mixed plastics, or that's just solid waste, or that's whatever it is, that's PET flake, or that's polypropylene pellet." That's the level that we want you to report. We don't. That last bullet in the last slide, and this slide, is key. We don't want you to have to characterize your waste. We don't want you to do that. Tell us what it is, as it's in the form that it's leaving your facility. That's the key. We don't want you to differentiate between some mixed bale or some mixed truckload of random stuff. Tell us what it is. Solid waste, mixed materials, mixed plastic, mixed paper, cardboard, newsprint, copper, steel, mixed at that very basic sort of, answer that, someone just off the street walked up and said, well, what is this? That is the level that we want you to report.
And the closer it matches your records, the easier it will be to report, because if you sell 100 tons of super office pack paper, you can tell us that's what I sold. I mean, it's, straight out of, so it's easiest for you to deal with. You don't have to rename everything for us or anything like that, as long as we can figure out what it is. That's the way it should be reported. That makes it easier for us when we're aggregating it in the database. It makes it cheaper and easier for you, so you don't have to recharacterize and re-add up things. It makes it easier for our people who might go out and audit or inspect the records to say, oh yeah, what you told us is exactly what was sold. So it's one of those things that's going to make it easier all the way along if you just match the records.
And we're hoping to design the data input system so that your very specific details about what you're selling can be rolled up into broader categories. So you can sort of identify, my weird product, which is, orange polycarbonate prescription bottle. That is a polycarbonate, and polycarbonate is a plastic. And then you sort of identify that once, and then from that point on, you just say, it's got another 1,000 tons of polycarbonate orange prescription bottles, and it just gets looped up into this category of plastic forever and ever, rather than having to sort of identify every single time what it is. And it matches what you're selling. So every time you just, I'm selling these things, and this is what I'm going to report.
Is that stretching or real question?
A
little bit. It looked like stretching.
Yeah, Dan Noble. Of course, I only have a problem with one of the words in there, which is the word mulch. Because mulch is something that you put on the ground in order to protect it. So it could be made of plastic, it could be made of rubber, it could be made of wood, it could be chip and grind, compostable material, it could be all those things. To a composter and one would be could be land applied, the other one could be used as playground chips, the other could be used as garden mulch. So, again, this argues for me to say the individual material type could be compostable material. It's recycled, it's compostable, but it's not composted. And that would specifically refer to what you guys are trying to call organics, but organics is kind of a mixed bag. Compostable material would argue that it's uncomposted green or woody material. Could even be manure, could be any of those things.
Sure. So we would have, as Robert said, in the database, as you're inputting your information, we're envisioning having kind of the categories, right? So plastic or rubber, right? And within rubber, you'd have mulch rubber or crumb rubber as a part of that rubber category. And then if it's, a plastic flake or whatever, it's going to be a nested hierarchy. So you're not just going to see an A through Z list of all the material types, it's going to be nested. So if you're only focusing on organic, then you can just focus on the organic subcategory, because you're not going to have plastics coming out, or hopefully you're not going to have a lot of plastics coming out of your compost.
And I'll also say that mulch could, in fact, as you say, refer to a number of things. So somebody who's sending chipped rubber, tire rubber for mulch, is sending material, rubber, tire rubber, to an end user, which would be probably a consumer. It's a mulch product, that means it qualifies as an end use. And which category does it go to? Probably consumer, but maybe a construction use, depending on how it's going, and it gets determined based on how they're selling or marketing the material, which it goes to. But chicken grind facilities sending chipped wood waste to mulch could also fall in that same category. It is mulch, as you say, it's going to land to protect the land. So it would still be the an end user going to maybe a consumer, maybe to consumer or construction uses, maybe to land application, depending on how they're marketing it. If you're selling it in bags at Home Depot, it's probably to the consumer. You know, if it's tumbled glass as a mulch, which, you know, they sell that too, that would also categorize as an end use because it's mulch. And what category does it go to? Again, probably consumer. So it's not dependent on the material that it's made out of, but you report, I'm sending 200 tons of chip rubber as mulch to an end user for consumer use. And that would be a reporting obligation if that's what you're doing. And so on for the other material types.
Let's move along here since we can do that. Oh, yeah, Larry here.
It's not clear, so if you're doing 20 different types of mulch, you have to report 20 different types. And if you're setting that each one of those types to different end users, you got to report each one of those. You have like 60.
Yeah, so the question was, and give me in here, if you have 20 different types of mulches and you have 60 different end users, then you have to report all of those. Well, the end users are by category. So if you have mulch that's mostly being land applied, you can say all of my mulch went to land application, how much. If all of your mulch, if you have 20 different blends, but they're all mostly, you know, wood, then you would just say chip wood.
One type could go to different places.
Sure. So yeah, you would have some tracking if you're sending to a consumer directly. So if you're selling direct to people that pull up and grab mulch in their pickup trucks and then go versus people who are land applying over vast areas, that would be two different types of end users.
Multiply that by all the types of product. That's a massive database.
So it's not the types of products as much as the material type. So if you have compost and you have wood chips that you sell, that's two different things. If you have a combination of, you know, wood chips and compost, I guess you can choose what you want to call it. But you don't have to say, you know, this is my soil potting mix versus my, you know, green mulch versus red mulch. Like, we're not interested in that level of detail, but just more general material type. Is it wood mulch? Is it green waste?
Well, another example, if I remember right, there's like over 100 grades of paper. So you'd have to sort them all out to report each one of them.
Remember when we said that you don't need to sort anything? That's still applies. So if you have, you know, if you're selling white paper and you have 10 bales of white paper that went out, that tell us I sold 10 tons of white paper.
Right, some places will sort many of those categories.
So if you're selling 100 different varieties of paper bales out to your various clients, you're obviously tracking that information because you're not going to charge the same for plain white ledger as you are for mixed paper versus trimmings versus what have you. You're tracking that information, right? I mean, you're selling it in 100 different grades. You're tracking it at 100 different grades. I mean, how many people sell material and they have no idea what material they're selling? You know, you track it. So, you know, if you're tracking it, just report it. If you're only tracking one grade and you sell everything as paper, that's all you have to report. If you track internally white paper versus newsprint versus OCC versus what have you, all the same, and everybody gets paid the same amount or pays you the same amount for all of these different grades of paper, then just report it all as paper. But if you track it as 50 different or 100 different grades of paper that's going out your facility, you sell it at different rates, different prices per ton, then tell us the different grades that you're selling it at, the different levels of segregation that you are actually selling it and tracking it at. We don't want you to track it at new levels of segregation. Just tell us it at the level that you're already tracking.
Oh, we have one online.
Yeah, we do have. Yeah, we have an online comment, from a regional agency that says using the county as the region for reporting purposes makes sense. And you could also use the recycling market development zone region, would be okay. And then the same person also says, I think there should be some tonnage threshold for defining end user. For facilities that have end users that we self-haul small quantities of compost for home use, they should be allowed to lump such small volume end users together.
Right, and they are lumped together because those would all be low volume consumers. So you could just say all of your direct purchase stuff is direct to consumers. So that's a category.
And I also like the thank you for the comment about using the region as being counties and or RMDCs. Those are both groups that we considered. We honestly, just to be frank, we thought the regions as being counties would probably be too granular, too small for people to really buy into, and they'd be concerned about providing that level of detail. Certainly, at CalRecycle level, we're happy to get the level of detail as much as we can get. So for us, county would be fantastic, but that's the reason we didn't propose that. RMDZ is also a great potential way to split things. I think we'd be happy with RMDZ zones too. That certainly loops in with our own internal group, but as we said, we received some feedback from people in the industry thinking that the water board regions might be good. But now we've heard water board regions and the Caltrans regions, and now we're hearing RMDC. So we'll have a little bit to think about, and a lot of people will let folks know that we're going to be sort of sending out some surveys later, and we'll try to get some feedback from people. But if people have specific thoughts, send them in. Even if all of it is, hey, I'm voting for Caltrans, or I'm voting for RMDC, or whatever. If that's the only comment you have, it's fantastic to get that, because then we can sort of get a sense for how many people feel like, it works better for one group or another, and it'll help us make our decisions later on.
Okay, we're going to move on to disposal. So regional methods for residuals and solid waste sent to disposal. We're tracking jurisdiction of origin, and the preferred method there would be asking for each load, unless you're receiving a periodic report from your hauler, which can be based on their billing records, the tons from each jurisdiction if they track that directly or at the landfill, number and size of in-service in different jurisdictions could also be used, or mixed, if you have a mixed truck. So do we want to use this only for jurisdictions that are, or for trucks that have multiple jurisdictions? Because, we don't want to give people, I guess, the chance of coming up and having a full truck that's just one jurisdiction and be like, oh, I'll send you the report later, which is going to be based on other things, right? We want the tons that are coming from one jurisdiction to be measured as such. So this isn't specifically stated in the regulations right now, but I think we might want to go that way, that these other methods be used for jurisdictions that are multiple jurisdictions within the same type of load context. And then for source sector, again, we prefer asking each load, but you can also set source sector by truck type. So you know that your side loaders are only doing residential, and then your front loaders or back loaders are doing commercial and multifamily. And you can use the weights of those truck types to estimate your commercial residential split, and then the same other types of avenues for people to reach their estimate for source sector. So in the case of what we brought up earlier, if you have 2,500 accounts, and you know that these accounts are commercial accounts and these other accounts are residential accounts, and you know the size of your commercial bins that are at your site, and you can give us a number of that volume of those bins and then translate that into a ton split between your residential and commercial, that would be an acceptable method for you to meet your source sector requirements. And we know that this is going to be an estimate for source sector. We know that not everybody's keeping track of it. So we've added specific language that if you're using these methods or an approved method by CalRecycle, or method approved by CalRecycle, your estimates are not going to be subject to the penalties. Okay, so if you're inaccurate, but you've tried using these methods and you're updating them annually, you're not going to be subject to a penalty because of source sector. So we hope that that calms some of those concerns. And we'll take some questions. We had one here, and then something for that.
And one of the things that I'm walking up here is, you know, in the other workshops we've said, we know this gives people heartburn. If you have other reasonable methods that you think we should add to the list that would make it easier, that we still get some better data than what we have, which is basically nothing on this issue, we'd be happy to hear it.
Let's start up front. And then
Adam Harwood, California Construction Industrial Materials Association. I'd just like to suggest where you have entities that aren't going to have to report that material, it'd be clear that they not be required to track that, because tracking the information is expensive in reporting it, and we get sort of separated loads, and we're just not going to get over that 110 threshold, and just the information system to track it. If you track it, you might as well report it, and it would be very onerous to track it. So clarity in that, if that applies as a information method to those required to track and report it, would be helpful for our industry.
yeah, we've added that language out since we had that discussion.
Perfect.
Saying, you know, for those that need to report this is how you do it.
Awesome. And then on the region concept, one of the reasons we would prefer a Caltrans region, a facility like Tigard, if they're getting a third party that's picking up some material that they have crushed, will not necessarily know or track where that job is being utilized if they came to the facility. For most facilities, you're inside a Caltrans region. They also do have the benefit of typically using the county boundary, so it's pretty easy to select. So you're going to end up, I think, with facilities that have difficulty if they aren't allowed an estimation method for region, where they're near a boundary, write that language.
Yeah, and I'll also say that facilities like Tigard, you know, they would be classified as a recycling facility, and therefore they wouldn't have to characterize the region where they're getting material. They would have to characterize the region where they're sending material. So I realize that, you know, you're getting material from a diffuse, you know, area, and maybe the haulers don't always know or don't always tell you, but if you're sending out a truck, you know, or 10 or 50 truckloads of material to Bakersfield or to Fresno or Sacramento or to where, you know, you generally know where you're sending a truck to. And so you can identify which region that truck is headed to, but that is the only reporting obligation you have, is where you're sending the material to, if you're sending it to an end user. So hopefully that helps as well.
I guess the point is not every operation and all materials is on a facility's truck. There are third-party contractor trucks that may not meet the broker definition. That, you know, I may have sold material to XYZ construction company, and they've provided trucks that pick that material up at my facility. I may not know where that job is, but it's going to be, you know, you're moving concrete, so it's probably within about a 20-mile radius of the facility. So that kind of is the challenge there. Is you don't always, you don't generally track on that kind of order where the materials go.
Sure, and in that situation, if you're selling to, you know, Robert's construction company, who's buying one truckload of asphalt or concrete from you, and they drive off and who knows where I'm going with my truck, you sold it to me, right? You haven't sold it to wherever I'm going to. So wherever I am, that's the region that you report. You sold it to me. You didn't sell it to my client. where, you know, I might drive 1,000 miles and, you know, deposit it somewhere in Arizona, right? Probably, you know, you sold it to me, and I'm based in Sacramento, so you sold it to Sacramento, you sold it to Region 5. That's the end of your reporting obligation. Now it's my responsibility as potentially a reporting entity. Maybe I'm not a reporting entity, but that's none of your business. You sold it to me, you're done. And now CalRecycle comes after me to determine whether I'm a reporting entity or not. And if I'm not, it's done. And if I am, then, you know, it's my problem. I have to determine what I have to report and where it went to. So you just have to report, you sold it to me. You don't know where it went, that's fine.
Laura Ferrante with Recology. You know, we appreciate this reasonable method for determining source sector and limiting categories they have to report, but we'd like it to be clear that reporting be based on estimated percentage of total tons received. This reads to me as reasonable methods for determining source sector, not reasonable methods for reporting. And elsewhere in regulations where source sector is required, it's a report ton size, jurisdiction of origin, source sector, which seems very specific. Jurisdiction of origin is easier to figure and easier to report, but source sector is still very problematic. And we just want to be clear that, as you have recognized, these numbers are going to be estimates at best. And so reporting by percentage of total tons would be better than an estimated percentage of total tons would be better than reporting on tons. And if that's not the intention, then it should work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll also say that, you know, ultimately everything will be converted into tons. You know, we will need to know total tons, and we'll need to know just tons by source sector, and whether that tons by source sector is provided in the form of actual tons or in the form of percentage of those total tons, it all converts into tons. But I think it's really a matter of how it's provided, and I think, you know, our intention is to try to give an opportunity to provide it sort of in whichever format, but ultimately it gets converted into tons, whether you do the math and convert it into tons before you report it, or you report it via percentage, and we do the math in our system and have it converted into tons. Ultimately, it comes down to tons. And we'll need to know, as I said, the total tons to begin with, in order for the percentage to mean anything. So I think it's more a matter of data entry capabilities, and I think we'll be able to accommodate both ways. But ultimately, as I said, it will be down to tons.
And I just want to add, in the disclosure reporting system, we've had some people say that tons are easier to deal with, or percentages are easier to deal with, and some people just don't get it. You know, some people could draw a chart if they like to do that, obviously they don't understand percentages. But some of that is, as Robert said, some of the system requirements that we could really work on to make clear frequency of reporting and how it's reported. I think we can find some of the words.
Yeah, cool. Real quick question, point of clarification. Still have a lot of room with this source sector as it is, but pretend you've got a franchise hauler with a roll-off box, drop it at a residential house. How do we report it? And who did you report that to? Does that mean that our scale house got to figure out from that hauler? Unless they're doing other reporting, which then we have to do it a different way. But do we have to figure out from that hauler, well, was it from a residential, or is it multifamily, commercial? You can see how complex it can get very quickly.
Yeah, so, you know, I think there are two main ways that information can be gathered in this. You know, we've got the truck rolls up, and you can either say, what jurisdiction did that come from, and what source sector did that come from? And the person driving the truck can either say, picked it up from a house in Sacramento, or I picked it up from a business in Elk Grove, or I generated this in my own home in Granite Bay. And so, you know, you can get data that way, or a contract or a franchise hauler every time I drive in the gate. Instead, at the end of the quarter, I'm going to give you a summary. You know, my head office is going to ship you guys a summary of all the information you need so that you can do your reporting. And if you have that agreement with that company, then they'll send you a summary and it'll say, we brought to your facility this quarter 500 tons of residential material from Sacramento and 200 tons of residential material from Oak Grove and 1,000 tons of commercial material from Oak Grove and 200 tons of commercial material from Sacramento. And then you'll pass that along to CalRecycle. You as a facility will be passing on the information that you received from that hauler, and you'll assume that that information is being received as correct. So if they get it wrong, that's not your problem, that's sort of their problem. But those are sort of the two main ways that you could do it. There are some other reasonable methods. If you don't have either of those, you could use things like every pickup truck is residential. And all we're going to do is ask them what city they came from. And we're going to assume that every pickup truck is residential and everything bigger than a pickup truck is commercial. And if that's your reasonable method that you had approved by CalRecycle, then that's solid. You take a little box saying it's a pickup truck and therefore residential, and you ask them what city it came from, and they told you, and that's what you wrote down, and that's what you submit that.
I like that last part a lot better. Because what we were looking at is we have about 22 different commodities that apply to all of our questionable, whether they're commercial hauls, contract hauls, et cetera. So you have 22 commodities, 3 different source sectors. Now my skeleton have to remember 66 different codes in order to get that right. And so that's where we're concerned. It's just snowball. But if you're okay with us saying that every pickup load that comes in, we get 60,000 a year just at our facility. If you're okay with us saying those are residential, or they're self-haul, residential, that's okay.
Yeah,
no, because now you just took off 60,000 of 250,000 just in that one.
Yeah, that was that's definitely one of the ways that we think could be utilized to make it easier for people to report. Certainly, if you'd like to ask people, we want to make that an option. So we have that included in the regs as well. But if that's the way that works for your facility and your operations, then that works. And I'd also like to clarify that one of the things you said, some number of material types, but for disposal facilities, which are the ones that need to report source sector, there's no requirement to report material type. You don't have to say, so many tons of paper from this jurisdiction and that source sector. It's all the same. Anything that goes into the hole is one material type, all disposal. So you don't report any material type for material going to disposal at a disposal facility.
And I want to clarify that the source sector is overall for the facility, not by jurisdiction. And it can be based on things like the truck type. So as you're saying, trucks and pickup trucks and cars can be self-haul, residential or whatever. Side loaders, commercial, or residential, sorry, and front loaders, commercial. Roll-off boxes, commercial. And if there's some way for us to do that in a way that makes sense, write it up. Get it into a reasonable method.
Kelly, Sacramento County. I just have a quick question regarding the reporting requirements for haulers. It implies here, so for solid waste hauls, they need to report the size by jurisdiction of origin and source sector for all solid waste delivered to each reporting entity, which is inclusive of a MRF, a transfer station, and a disposal facility. However, for organic and or recyclable materials hauled by the hauler, they're only required to report that if they send it to a MRF or transfer station. So my question is, why not when they also send it to a disposal facility for the organic or recyclable materials?
So the assumption is that if it's going to disposal facilities, it's going to for disposal. So it's no longer considered a recycling flow. It's just a technicality, but it's the same type of information.
So we do accept organic material and divert it, as well as recyclable material and divert it at our landfill.
So in that case, if you have like an area that you're receiving green waste, and all that green waste is nice and clean, and you're sending that off to recycling, and you don't have to report source sector or jurisdiction of origin for that material because it's a recycling flow. So in your report, you would have your disposal report, and you would say this is how many tons went into the landfill from these jurisdictions and source sectors, and then you would have your recycling section of your report in which you'd say we had, 100 tons of green waste that went off-site for recycling, and that's the only requirement that you would have at that point.
And this is another situation where we have a single site, where we have multiple operations, as they pertain to 901 reporting requirements. Not necessarily for your operational situation or for your permitting situation, but you've got a disposal facility, the landfill, and you also have a recycling and or a composting facility that diverts organic and or non-organic recyclables for composting or recycling elsewhere. So you have materials coming in for disposal that goes into the landfill, right? And you have materials that come for recycling and composting that leaves your facility for recycling and composting. So two operations at the same site. So you report those flows somewhat differently. So that's where the difference is. Some of that organic material might come in and go to disposal, in which case you report it as anything else going to disposal. No material type, but jurisdiction of origin and source sector. If instead you don't dispose that material, but instead you divert it to an off-site compost facility, you report it by material type and tons, but no jurisdiction of origin or source sector. Larry? Or Veronica?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Veronica Pardo, CRC. So I want to preface again, source sector, very complicated piece for us asking at the MERV what's coming in the load. Now, I don't know if you guys just caught this, but there was a discrepancy here about source sector and jurisdiction of origin about these tons. I'm hearing on one end that you want to hear source sector by jurisdiction of origin. And then I'm hearing on the other end, you want to hear source sector by facility. So any tons coming out of the facility, okay, sorry, give me a moment here. You guys have been talking about tracking material. You've not been talking about a mass balance. But what I'm hearing with source sector is two different pieces, either by jurisdiction of origin, so then it would be kind of a flow by sector, very complicated, right? Or simply just source sector out the back end of the facility that has nothing to do with jurisdiction of origin. That would simply be a mass balance. Source sector information for California, commercial, residential. Those are two totally different pieces, and you're asking for two totally different data sources from there. So right now, we've just already heard a discrepancy in this room and a complication around that, and a very big misunderstanding around this tracking. So again, I believe source sector adds a layer of complexity that even the people in this room don't yet understand how that would be tracked in methodology. And then on top of it, in terms of the data that you would be getting, I'm not even sure what kind of data you would be getting given those two options. Mass balance at the end of the facility as just X tons that were sent to disposal, or X tons were sent to disposal by jurisdiction of origin, and then within that, stratified by source sector. So just wanted to make that clear.
Sure. So I think the confusion came in with an example, but the intent and what we're hoping to get is facility level, out the back, source sector.
Max.
Right. So whichever method you choose to use, in the end, you can tell us for all of my tons of facility A, 60% is commercial and 40% is residential.
Of my disposed material from my.
Of my disposed material from my facility.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are a couple of places where it says this information will be reported by jurisdiction of origin and source sector. And that means by jurisdiction of origin and also by source sector, not by jurisdiction of origin, and then by source sector, which is very confusing how it's written, so we'll fix that.
And then, the other piece that I think, playing into this complication issue, we tried to address, if it's coming from another facility and you receive it, you may not know the split, right, that facility had.
Right.
So that's why we introduced that kind of new way of saying, just tell us what facility it's coming from, and we'll get that split off information from them and pre-populate that into your account. So you can say, okay, I got this many tons from MRF A, and MRF A has this jurisdiction of origin breakdown, and also separately, this source sector breakdown, which now I'm going to apply to those tons that I received from that MRF.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're hoping that that's going to help.
I think clarifying that you want a mass balance for source sector is important. That's actually what you guys are going at. Because you keep talking about the flow of materials, but then when it comes to source sector, it's not that you don't care about the flow of source sector. You just want to know California's source sector disposal. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding.
That's
So
amazing.
some clarification there would be good.
Larry speaks from Evansville County. So the CalRecycle approving with alternatives, if Doug gets an alternative approved, can I use it, or do I have to apply for it separately?
The easiest thing to do would be to let us know before the regs are
Yeah,
finalized.
tell us right now, and then we can add it to one.
Because then it'll be in the list of regs, and anybody can use those. But yeah, if somebody submits a request to use an alternative method and reevaluate it and approve it, then most likely that'll be available to be used by anybody. But we're trying to make this all of these alternative methodologies, these reasonable methodologies, to be based on if you can't do it by the default method, right? So we're trying to layer these in a hierarchical way so that the way we prefer it is that everybody asks everybody everything. If you can't do that, then get, quarterly reports from your haulers. If you can't do that, get, some information based on truck tax. If you can't do that, use some other thing. And so, we don't want everyone to just, default to the lowest common denominator and everybody pick the easiest thing at the bottom of the list and then might have any of the other options available. So, yes, they'll be available for other people to use, but based on certain criteria, and we'll want to make sure that people are using the method that they're able to at the highest level that they're able to on the list. If that makes sense, hopefully it does.
The question was, does use it, do I need a piece of paper from you all to say no one uses the same exemption?
Yes. But you don't have
people
to.
in here are going to apply for an alternative.
Get them on the list, and then they won't be alternatives. We'll just be on the list.
Right. So, it's easy enough to say I'm picking option L or P or, C on the list of approved methods on the list because I can't do this, or because I don't have this, or I don't have scales, or I don't have the ability to track X, Y, and Z, and then it'll be approved. If you're going to say, the city of Elk Grove asked for this and they got approved, and I'd like to use the same one that they did because I'm in the same situation, then it's the same thing. You submit a paper, you say, I would like to use that same methodology because I have the same situation they have, and more than likely it'll be approved. But again, we don't want people to just all say, hey, let's go down the list. The easiest one at the very bottom, we just, make a wild guess out of thin air because we literally have nobody on the ground at any of our facilities and we don't know anything that's going on. Therefore, we should just guess. We don't want everybody in the state to just say, well, I'm going to pick that one. Because there's one facility in the state that, it makes sense for. Now, all of a sudden, everybody gets to pick that easiest way to do it. So we want people to do it in a way that gives us the best data that we can get while taking into account the fact that people have, constraints on their operational needs.
And I think, what Robert's getting at is in the disposal reporting system, if you have an unattended facility, it can be assigned to the host jurisdiction in the current current system. And if you have a small enough facility that doesn't have scales, you can do surveys and things like that. And we wouldn't want to say, well, because we let this little transfer station assign it to the host jurisdiction, that Altamont can assign all the waste to the host jurisdiction or whatever. You know, so there is some discrimination that we want to be able to apply, certainly for jurisdiction of origin. Source sector, I can tell you, if I'm looking at this stuff, I'm going to be pretty like, yeah, that makes sense, because it is a tough one. And we don't want it to be really burdensome on people. But it's really key to get those ideas in now about what are different alternatives, what would make sense, so we can look at them and agree to them and include them. I mean, so far we've got truck type, which I think is a pretty simple approach. That might be hard in practice, but it's a lot easier than anything else I could think of. And as Robert was saying, we don't want people to say, well, it kind of looks like 60% commercial. I mean, it's harder. We want some reasonable basis. That's the reasonable methods.
We have one question here in the back.
Will you speak up a little bit?
Question for you regarding the disposal reporting. If a transfer station, if you're going to pull the information from the transfer station as a disposal facility, what happens if the volumes are different? Because oftentimes, as you know, they're going to be different. What numbers are going to be used?
That's a good question. We've talked about having some kind of flag mechanism that, if you have over 5% or 2% difference, then we would investigate that further. But I don't know, I don't think that we've established a procedure per se to say, the landfill is always going to be right, or...
Well, currently in the disposal reporting system, landfills report the tonnages all the way down, and those numbers have to reconcile with the information reported to the Board of Equalization. I would foresee us going with what the landfill reports, as long as it says there is going to be discrepancy for scale differences, moisture differences over the time period, and that's okay. We're not. That's not one where we're going to be saying, "Oh, you're a ton off. There's a problem."
Right. So it's the obligation for the disposal facility to report what they dispose, and the obligation for the disposal facility to report what they use on site for beneficial reuse. So those numbers are going to be used to determine how much was disposed of and how much was used on site for beneficial reuse. If we find a situation where transfer stations and MRFs are reporting 500,000 tons going to a disposal facility, and a disposal facility only registering 500 tons being disposed of, that's not going to be an automatic, everybody gets fined and, goes to jail. But it's going to be an opportunity for us to be like, that's weird. Let's figure out what's going on. That doesn't make any sense. Did somebody just forget a couple of zeros, or somebody's stockpiling information or material? Which may be perfectly valid, but it just raises a flag for us to say, let's go and look at this, because that doesn't jive. But ultimately, it's the facility who's reporting is responsible for their reporting. So transportation is responsible for reporting what they send out. The disposal facility is responsible for reporting what they dispose and for the on-site beneficial use.
And for the information coming from the transfer station, if their tonnages may be different than what the landfill reports, but their jurisdiction of origin will be controlling for the tonnages that came from their transfer station. So if 50% came from Sacramento and 50% came from El Dorado Hills, that percentages would be applied to the tonnages that are reported at the landfill. So it's not like we disregard one set of data over the other, but there's going to be some blending of the best data sources. What does each reporting entity know the best? What is their data that they're responsible for?
Okay. Me online.
We have a question. Will the regs that allow rural areas to perform quarterly surveys instead of surveying each load apply to 8901 reporting?
in general, we are stepping away from survey week, but we have provided these alternative methods, and we do have exemptions for small operators to use slightly different methods. But generally, there's no survey week in 901. Okay, we're going to move on to enforcement. And we'll have Paulina here talk, but generally, this section didn't change very much. We did try to clarify the whole process of first having a notice of violation, and the notice just means, hey, we have noticed that there's something going on here. Provide us some additional information. You have a deadline to provide information before a violation is filed, right? So we heard a lot of concern with the language seeming like there was no chance to remediate a violation, and that definitely was not the intent. So we've changed the language a little bit. We might change it even more. So basically the process is, if we note something, we'll send you a notice. We'll provide you with a timeline for you to remediate that violation. If you remediate it, all good. If you don't remediate it, and that's, if you refuse to give us records, if you refuse an inspection, if you simply, don't have anything to give to us and you don't work with us, that's when the violation then comes into play. And there's a hearing process that goes along with that fine, and people have a chance to state their case, et cetera. I'll let Paulina elaborate on that since I'm not an expert.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paulina. I'm the solid waste manager at CalRecycle. As the slide presents it, basically we're going to look at the 4 key areas of any violations in the reporting aspect as a whole. If an entity refuses or fails to provide information, falsification of any kind, falsification of any types of records or reports, refusal of inspection when we do come on site to take a look at the records, and failure to keep any records at all. So within those general areas, that's where we're going to be assessing whether there'll be violations and any penalties that will be associated with it. And of course, as Monica said, we would be noticing that entity prior to any kind of violation to work out some kind of a compliance due date deadline, and to see if that entity can provide some kind of a justification of why there was a reason for not being able to provide information or have a thought or a process in case they have falsified information or it appears that way. The main thing is that we as a department will consider whether the violation was intentional when we go down that penalty process. We want to look and see if there's a history of non-compliance. And this isn't just after 1 or 2 times. I mean, we're looking at multiple times where a facility has not been compliant with the request or the reporting system. And we want to look at the gravity of the violation. So there is going to be a difference between, failure, if you're looking at failure to keep records versus, refusal to submit the information, there's going to be a gradient. And as you look in this regulation, you'll see a penalty table accordingly. There will be chances, as Monica said, when we do that warning letter, if there's questions, they will be working with CalRecycle to answer any of that questions. Also, lastly, I want you guys to remember, there's a footnote on the bottom, is if a hauler does not report to you, or they report inaccurate information, that facility receiving that, material will not be held liable. The one thing that is asked specifically in this is that you provide a reasonable explanation of why you can't get that information. You can just say, this hauler comes intermittently, for example, or the hauler, did not give us the name or the information that we requested. And then we ask that you ID the hauler, so at that point we can go in and follow up. So it's more of a way to kind of make sure that we get the right information at the adequate time. And within these regs, you'll see that there is a 30-day difference between, getting, between the haulers and then the landfill. So we're trying to build in that time frame, because that was one of the initial concerns when we first started this process. So are there any questions? Claire?
So the changes you've made to this, were they made after this version from November 4th? Or is this the latest language in November 4th?
There might be a few changes since then, but we did rework a lot of the language for the new version.
And that's in the 11th.
You will note that some of the areas are kind of moved around as well.
So the way I'm reading the 4th version, that when there's an error, you get issued a notice of violation. So you're right off the bat, there's no chance to fix it, you already have violation, but you can fix it with a penalty. Why not have a process where you can just notify somebody of an issue before you get a notice of violation? Notice of violation can be a very harsh issue for some people. Just, you have to report those in many different forms.
Yeah.
Right,
We will have like a warning before we go to a notice of violation.
That's not the language, so that's new language you're going to be putting.
Well, I can go ahead and take a look and see what we can propose. But the whole idea is that you would get like a flag, right, from the system saying this does not match.
Right, and that's what Bob was asked for at the beginning, but the language here still says, very first thing is issue a notice, a written notice of violation.
Yeah, with an accusation of imposing of a civil penalty, correct? We weren't assessing penalties at that point.
Still, the fact that you get a notice of violation is not a simple little thing for many people. Just getting a warning letter that, hey, you got to fix this or else we're going to issue a violation would be a lot more simpler on everybody. It'd be a lot less time on you folks than going something formally.
Well, if you don't do that, then that's where we would go.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Right.
But that's not.
But you still want that step put in here specifically.
So let's leave a step that you have a chance, warning, fix, there's an issue, why? There's going to be so many errors in this thing.
Oh, yeah, I can
So let's
understand.
acknowledge that and give people a chance to fix it rather than issuing notice of violation.
Lauren Ferrante with Ecology. We have several comments on the liability and enforcement sections we've provided and will provide. But I want to make a comment on the footnote that you mentioned about reporting entities being accused of liability if they report that they have received inaccurate information. There's no way to know if you've received accurate, inaccurate, or accurate information. So it doesn't seem right to hold a reporting entity responsible for relying on possibly inaccurate information from a third party.
Okay, I'm not quite following. Okay.
Yeah, so Laura, I'll respond to that. So, the one that you have some control over is if you receive material from a hauler or some other facility and they refuse to report to you, that you're not held responsible for the fact that somebody has not reported.
Sure, but that's.
And then, right, so the other part of it is if somebody's reported inaccurately to you, and as you say, you have no way of knowing when you get it that it's inaccurate. Your obligation is to take the information reported to you and pass it along to CalRecycle or to another reporting entity, depending on what you're doing. If it turns out via some investigation or audit that the information that was provided to you was inaccurate, we go out and we audit, say, the transfer station that's been sending material to your landfill, and we find out that they've been giving you bad information for the last 3 years. You're not held liable for the fact that you've been passing on that bad information to us. So while you didn't know that it was bad when you got it, it was determined later that it was bad, and so we're just building in some security that even once it's determined to be bad, that you're not going to be held liable for the fact that you passed on that bad information. So you're not liable for not receiving information from a hauler who refuses to give you information as long as you tell us that they refuse to. And if it turns out that somebody's been giving you bad information, you're also not liable for that.
Okay, I mean, yeah, and I think it needs to be made a little enrolling exclusion liability if you report the inaccurate information to CalRecycle.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I agree. I think we can clarify that.
I'll go to Ramirez with Tiger Construction Materials. Following what the gentleman was saying about the notice of violation, it would be nice to really make sure that we have like a pre-warning before a letter that says notice of violation. Because nowadays, construction companies, when they go out for bid, one of the things they look at is the safety record and any violation that you have under the sun. So, just even if the notice of violation doesn't carry any penalty, it's a no-no. Because when you go to bid with another competitor, they look at safety records, notice of violation, under recycle, under hazardous materials, and the air, and the ink. So, it's very important, like the gentleman said, that we have a warning before you have a letter that says NOV.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and we'll discuss that.
And I'll ask if I can get some feedback from both of you, and anybody else who's got feedback on this. On that same vein, how much time, 15 days, 30 days, 45 days before an NOV makes sense, so that you feel like it's enough time for you to correct it and not feel like you're being, rushed. So it just gives us a sense.
Honestly, 15 days.
15 days?
And now that everything's electronically, 15 days.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was looking at on this list is there's no timeline on the subsequent offenses, and this is a program that's going to be in effect ad infinitum into the future. So for repeat violations, maybe there is some time frame when you want old violations to run off schedule. Maybe under your administrative procedures there already is. But if you've got a company that, day one, I imagine you're going to have to be very understanding of the whole new realm of individuals falls under your authority, which is the recyclers. I think there's going to be a lot of potential that you might feel the need to write an NOV. So that's going to be their first warning potentially. And then if they, 5, 10 years down the road, 3 years down the road, new employees come in, something falls through the cracks. So that first, second, third offense just seems to have no timing to me, and it seems like it probably should if it didn't in statute or it doesn't in administrative procedure. And then what you're correcting does seem to be information. The one interesting thing that might need some clarity if you're creating some what I think are very reasonable methods is the one where you didn't track records because you're not going to be able to historically fill that back up. It's going to be recreating a system to not have the same mistake in the future. So maybe reflecting that as an acceptable correction in that case. I don't know if you need to, but just looking kind of at this table.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we do have one more slide and we have 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to move on to get this out of the way and then we can come back to questions. The last slide here is confidentiality. There are provisions in 901 that protect confidential information from public information requests. And we just wanted to highlight that these confidential pieces of information that, contract terms, individual end users, individual facilities receiving materials, pricing, contract information, is not subject to public request, whether that is in a report sent to us or whether it's in the records that are maintained in your facility that are subject to inspection or audit, or whether we create records based on an inspection or audit, or whether we get requests from other local governments. That information will be protected regardless of where it lies in this section. That's all we wanted to say there. And with that, we'll take any remaining questions. Back.
I'll just speak, Jack, before you go, sorry. I think the main takeaway of this slide is that proprietary information is proprietary information. It doesn't matter where it came from or how CalRecycle gets it. Proprietary is proprietary. And if we're not allowed to release it via the Public Records Act, we're just not allowed. It doesn't matter whether we get it via any of these routes. It's all protected. All right, Jack, sorry.
Can you go back 2 slides? Okay. On there, the comment was made about going away from the weekly surveys for origin. Fine. I just want to make sure that this is not going to touch the weight conversion methodology that's already in statute or regulation that says that 35 years we take our flat rate, find the conversion ratio. I want to make sure that one's getting.
So you're using conversion rate for garbage?
Like a pickup truck.
Okay, so for the self-haul type.
Right, because in there it talks about if the facility does not handle more than 1,000 tons, it doesn't have access to scale. That gets into that realm of when you don't have scale, when you have scale, when you have to take these 5-year surveys. They used to be annual.
Right, so we want to steer people again into using scales because we want to have that higher quality data. So we're trying to encourage people to use scales. So we want the circumstances under which people don't use scales to be more limited than before. That's our goal, actually. So
will there be an exception to that? Because that's not that's what we fought this for a long time. That, we're doing almost 1,000 transactions a day at a facility. There's no way we got like the pickup truck. We pass through very quickly because we've got every 5 years we'll do that with survey, get back conversion factor.
Yeah, for self-haul, we're not saying wait every self-haul vehicle going in, going out. The survey that you do now in relation to setting the tonnages for the Board of Equalization report are for kind of for that thing. And I don't see us saying, well, you can no longer do what you've been doing or like self-haul vehicles or whatever.
That's why I want to make sure subsection E addresses that, and I just want to make sure it's not going to develop a conflict between those two.
We'll have to,
Well, it says update annually.
And we're going away from 5 years. Okay, so we'll have to look at that here. Okay, and then just a quick scenario, Robert, on the next slide on the enforcement. So what if the transfer station reports inaccurately to the disposal facility? The disposal facility has the records that are correct. We know exactly how many tons we got from that transfer station. And we report it, and you guys do your investigation. We have now passed on corrected information. Who gets held responsible?
Right, so what you're responsible as a disposal facility report is the total number of tons disposed and the total number of tons used for beneficial reuse by jurisdiction of origin and on a facility-wide basis source sector. Now, some of that information, the jurisdiction of origin and source sector, will be based on the information submitted via the transfer station for MRF. And if a MRF or transfer station passes that information onto you, they say they sent you 100 tons, but you really got 1,000 tons. And you say, well, I sent 1,000 tons disposal from this transfer station. The jurisdiction of origin and source sector information that is sort of allocated based on that facility's overall information will come along with that 1,000 tons that you're saying you disposed from them. And that discrepancy, that 100 tons versus 1,000 tons, you'll be reporting 1,000 because that's what you're obligated to report. I said 1,000 tons of disposal. And so then we will then go look at why there's this huge discrepancy between what the transfer station is telling us they sent you versus what you're telling us you actually disposed of. And in a lot of circumstances, that may be normal. I as a transport station might send you 1,000 tons, and you might only dispose of 100 of it because you're going to sit on the other 900 tons for potential beneficial reuse. You don't know, you're setting it off the side, you're gonna maybe use it next month because it's all D&D material and you're waiting for a big construction project outside. So maybe you don't dispose of it during that quarter. And so that's a very reasonable, understandable discrepancy between what I said I sent you and what you said you disposed of. And, if we happen to investigate because of that, we'll see that and everything is good. But if we find out that that's not the case and there's weird things going on, people are either, not reporting what they should or there's bad document retention, then, we'll find that too. But just because there's a discrepancy doesn't mean there's automatically something amiss. We know that there are not always going to be an exact ton-to-ton match between what I send you and what you dispose of, because there are, as I say, people stockpile stuff, they wait on stuff, they hold stuff over, particularly with beneficial reuse and other types of operations.
Kelly, just a quick comment with regards to the notice to correct. Although 15 days is not unreasonable, because with our facility, there can be multiple parties involved as far as reconciling that information and getting the information corrected back to you. I would just say that 30 days would be a better option for us from the facility perspective.
So recommendation for 30 days mitigation.
Yeah, I think you actually already do this, and I just wanted to clarify. You mentioned earlier that you only kind of report production, kind of if it's aggregated with at least 3 facilities. I'd just like to encourage that, particularly for the construction materials. Under existing laws, things like mined rock aren't reported unless they reach a number of people in the local market, so people can't reverse engineer productions, and you're right, they potentially gain some market advantage bidding in the local marketplace. So maybe check with DOC about where they've set that threshold, and consider incorporating that into how you release bulk information on things like base material or wrap produced, because those are public commodities that are consumed in the local marketplace.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think the governing principle behind what's reported is if it's public information, then there's no restriction about what's reported. If it's public information, and there's no constraint. But if it's proprietary information, if the information that we're talking about is confidential, proprietary in some way, then we are not allowed to release it unless it's in a format, a fashion that takes away that proprietary nature, that keeps it from being able to be, as you say, reverse engineered or assigned back to a particular facility. So whether that means, wrapping it up to, 2 counties or 5, or, the whole state, or, all facilities in the universe that we're talking about, or maybe we can't release it at all because there's no way to release it without divulging the individual companies and the proprietary nature of the information that's in there. So each release of information that contains proprietary or confidential information would have to be assessed on sort of an individual basis. But the underlying restraint is that we can't release the information if it divulges the confidential or proprietary nature of the data that's in there.
Okay. Well, we have 1 minute left. I'm going to wrap it up and close out. And we can take your question after, but I don't want to hold everybody back. So, as we talked about before, this is probably going to be the last informal workshop. We will probably be following up with some sort of survey about your software, about what you're tracking. So be on the lookout for that. Please respond. It's going to make it easier for all of us if we have that information sharing. And we're looking forward to submitting this for formal rights development in the spring. Here's our contact information, and if you'd like to, send us any comments at any time, questions, we really appreciate that feedback. And with that, I'm going to release the rest of you. If there's any lingering questions, like Neil's over here, we'll take that.
And before you go, I'll just say, if anybody happens to particularly want to participate in these surveys and are anxious to give us your information, please let us know, because we'll, jump the fast list to make sure that we get you out the survey so that you You know, we're still debating on who we're gonna send it out to. Probably we're gonna send it, out to everybody who's on the listserv, and then, a huge facet list. And, you know, DRS, so we're gonna try to blanket the universe with the request. But if you particularly want to be, you know, participating, send me an email, we'll make sure you, specifically get on the list.
With those comments and visual methods and.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, question, just comment, reiterate what Nick talked about earlier. Food processing waste is food materials. You're taking the definition out of the Title 14 regs that refers back to food processors. A lot of material goes to animal feed or condia tomato, takes in tomatoes, they send the tomato bed out, it gets directly land supply. In some cases, it goes for animal feed. But they haven't done the table at all, and they came in hard and heavy at the end of the compostable materials handling regs after 6 years. They showed up at the last formal meeting and caused some disruption and had to rewrite the regs. So I would really get in contact with those folks. I think it helped facilitate an outreach to them.
I appreciate that. You know, we sent out requests for people to participate to well over probably 6,000 emails, across as many material types as we could find. You know, we've done individual sort of research to try to identify industry groups and big players in different groups. You know, we invite them and we invite them and we re-invite them, and we can't force them to come. You know, certainly we'll take as many emails or phone numbers as you've got, and we'll reach out to them and invite them again. But if you happen to know them, we found that we get a lot better feedback and a lot better participation if people who actually know these folks tell them that they should come and be at the table and in the room and participate. Because with us, to just be honest, they don't come. They just kind of ignore our requests.
They ignore, you know. No, and you know, on that note, we get a lot of bounces too, because the emails that we send out, you know, I don't have time to send out 6,000 individual emails, so I get a lot of bounces. Sorry. I'm really sorry. But if you have your list of people that you're like, hey, these folks are going to be interested, just forward our notices to them, because then they'll be, you know, at least aware that it's happening, and you'd be like, hey, heads up, this probably matters to you. It's going to carry more weight than this random email coming out of left field from some government agency that they don't already know anything about. So we'll appreciate that help. Any other questions? Okay.